Hey, so I hear that people really love absurdly long video essays analyzing TV shows. Why don't I give it a try? Do a project that's a little bigger than usual, see how it goes. And what show should I pick? What could possibly have so much depth to its story that it necessitates this much analysis? What kind of convoluted mess of inscrutable lore needs me to spend hours of my time picking apart and explaining every last detail? What kind of twisty, mind-bending sci-fi fantasy mystery epic is worthy of investing this much of my time into? Well, how about this?
Oh, yes! Go! Way to go, Todd!
If you're unfamiliar, let me introduce you to This Is Us. It's an NBC show about a big family of people who love each other and learn to overcome their various personal emotional struggles. Yeah, so I know this show is a little bit outside of my wheelhouse. This Is Us isn't a twisty, speculative genre show like I usually talk about. And, how do I put this? It's for old people. I've never heard anybody under 40 talk about this show. I spend a lot of time on the internet. But something I notice on the rare occasions when I log off and go talk to people out in the world is that there can be a pretty massive divide between the kinds of TV shows that get online buzz and the kinds of TV shows that a huge majority of the population like to watch. This Is Us was very popular and received consistent critical acclaim while it was running, and lots of people watched it. But people like us never cared about it. You know, younger, internet-savvy people who spend way too much time watching video essays on YouTube. We like big franchises and high concepts. Who wants to watch this cheesy, sappy family drama? That's why I'm doing this. I want to broaden my horizons and all of yours. This Is Us is a great show, and it's worth checking out even if it doesn't seem like your vibe. More specifically, I want to talk about the way that the show approaches mystery, because that's my bread and butter. This story isn't complicated or lore-heavy, but it does make use of selective information and twist reveals in a way that I think we can learn from. How do you keep your audience hooked on finding out more information about the characters? How do you surprise them, misdirect their attention? I'm going to go through the entire show from start to finish to give you an idea of what it's like to watch it straight through and how it uses the control of information to direct you. Let's talk about the story of the show. And as I describe what makes it great, you might start to realize that it has a lot more in common with your favorite shows than you thought. So to explain what this video is, I'm going to take you through the show season by season. Each season analysis was written after I finished watching that season, meaning you're hearing my thoughts in real time, before I knew what was coming in the next season. I want to take you through my experience of watching the show, the things I found myself focusing on, and how the story's mystery element kept me engaged. Let me go ahead and summarize the first episode. There's this couple, Jack and Rebecca Pearson. Rebecca is pregnant with triplets, and her water breaks on Jack's birthday, meaning that dad and kids will have the same birthday. We also meet Kevin, Kate, and Randall. Kevin is a B-list actor, Kate is his sister battling obesity, and Randall is a rich executive trying to track down his deadbeat dad. All three of them show signs of mental health struggles of some kind. Kevin is on a crappy sitcom called The Manny that he hates, until he has a meltdown on set and quits. Kate goes to a support group for overweight people and meets a cute guy named Toby. Randall finds his dad, William, and goes to tell him off, only to find his dad isn't what he expected. His dad was a drug addict when he abandoned him, but he's since gotten clean and seems like a good guy who's genuinely remorseful. So Randall, on impulse, invites him to meet the rest of his family, his wife Beth and his daughters Annie and Tess. Randall is excited to start a relationship, but William reveals that he has terminal cancer. Rebecca gives birth, but one of the three triplets was a stillborn. Jack and Rebecca are devastated, but then, because they desperately want 3 babies, they adopt a third kid born on the same day.
I took the sourest lemon that life has to offer and turned it into something resembling lemonade.
Well, when life gives you lemons.
And that's where we get the twist of the episode. The scenes with Jack and Rebecca take place in the past, and their 3 kids are Kevin, Kate, and Randall. The moment they reveal the twist is really great because the fireman who found baby Randall offers Jack a cigarette, and you have that moment like, wait a minute, you can't smoke in a hospital? Unless... Now before I say anything else, I want to get ahead of something. We're still feeling the effects of that H-Bomber guy video. If I didn't say anything, there's a chance that somebody would Google some of my recap just now and go, whoa, hold on a second. The recap in this video is almost word for word identical to the one on the fan wiki. You're a plagiarist. Yes, my summary was mostly copied from the fan wiki, because that was also me. I wrote that.
Of course I know him. He's me.
Yeah, so when I watch a show for a video, I tend to go to the fan wiki and read episode summaries after I watch them, just to make sure I'm not missing anything. But the fan wiki for This Is Us didn't have them. In general, this fan wiki is pretty sparse compared to most other shows I've seen. So I decided that I'll do it myself. I was already taking notes as I watched, so it was easy enough to turn them into episode summaries. So all this stuff on the fan wiki, the summaries for each and every episode, I wrote all of them. I'm not saying this to brag. Okay, maybe a little. But also, this illustrates my point. The fact that nobody had bothered to make these before me is further proof that This Is Us isn't that popular among internet-savvy younger people. As much as any other, this show deserves its own small army of chronically online neurodivergent introverts who obsessively categorize every little thing about it. That first episode sets up what you can expect from the rest of the show going forward. Individual storylines that follow Kate, Kevin, and Randall in the present, alongside a concurrent storyline following Jack and Rebecca in the past, with some kind of thematic idea tying all of them together. I'm going to start my analysis by going over the Season 1 storyline of each main character, so that we can understand how this story is set up and what we can expect going forward. Starting with Kate. In the first season, each of the three siblings has one deep emotional issue that defines their story arc. With Kate, this is her weight. Basically, everything she does ties back to that in some way.
Tell me to quit feeling sorry for myself. I don't know. Tell me to wake the hell up. Tell me to lose the damn weight.
But I want to be more specific. It's not like the show is just saying, look, she's fat, and then leaving it there. Her weight definitely isn't the butt of any sort of joke at any point. The purpose of Kate's story is to explore her emotional state and get to the heart of why she got this big, while also not telling us why. I know that makes no sense, but I'll explain as we go. We first meet Kate at her support group in the pilot episode, which is where she meets Toby. As they find a connection and start dating, both Toby and the audience get to learn a lot about how Kate's mind works. These early plotlines follow a similar pattern. Toby pushes to get to know Kate better, and he stumbles upon an idiosyncrasy of hers that he just can't understand. We, the audience, watch this unfold, along with scenes of Kate's childhood, which lets us piece together why she's acting this way by the end of the episode. Then, Kate finally opens up to Toby, and Toby comes up with exactly the right thing to say or do and brings them closer together with a grand romantic gesture. For example, let's look at episode 4. Kate and Toby are out on a date, and they run into Toby's ex-wife. Kate becomes obsessed because she thinks she can't compete. She stalks her online to the point where she goes to her workplace, a clothing store. The ex-wife assumes Kate is there to get a job, and Kate is too embarrassed to contradict her. Kate ends up getting hired, which is convenient because she had just quit working for Kevin in the last episode, but obviously this is all really awkward for Toby. Toby gets really angry with her and tells the story of how his ex-wife cheated on him. Seeing this reaction from Toby, the first time in the show so far that he ever showed anger, Kate realizes what she's been doing wrong and apologizes. We can tell during the storyline that there's something deeper going on with Kate that makes her do this, beyond typical insecurity. See, this is what I was talking about with the whole mystery angle. All these episodes introduce a question. Why does Kate feel this way about this thing? We get an answer by the end, but it's only a small piece towards the bigger mystery of why Kate is like this. It's the same fundamental story mechanic as a fantasy show doling out bits of lore, but for a different genre and audience. Kate's actions in these episodes seem absurd at first, but as the stories unfold, you come to understand what's probably her core defining character flaw of the season. Kate thinks that she isn't worthy of happiness because she's fat. The reason she spirals after seeing Toby's ex-wife is that this woman looks like a supermodel. She starts thinking that Toby could never truly love her because he must always be comparing her to that. The idea that Toby loves her the way she is doesn't seem to occur to her. She's just full of self-loathing all the time because she allows her self-image to be totally defined by how much she weighs. This, ironically, is what keeps her from losing weight. The running plot of the season has Kate trying and failing to lose weight, and it keeps implying that maybe Kate doesn't really want to lose weight. She holds on to her weight as the sole reason for all her problems, and she has a subconscious fear that she'll lose all her weight and still be unhappy. This is more or less explicitly stated in episode 9, where Kevin's girlfriend Olivia confronts her about it.
Do I look scared to you?
You're scared that you'll lose all the weight and that nothing will have changed, right? But you'll discover that the person who you've always been is who you truly are.
Despite how much the season focuses on her weight loss, we almost never see any details about what she's doing to lose weight. We don't get any information about what she's eating or how much she's exercising, which is a smart move by the writers. As a culture, we tend to have this extreme idea of personal responsibility. If you can't do what you want to do, or if there's something wrong with your life, it's your fault and no one else's. This is the root of a lot of fat phobia. People believe that obese people get that way because they made bad choices, and if they aren't losing weight, they must not be trying hard enough. In reality, there are a lot of complicated factors that cause people to become obese, that are physical, mental, and environmental. If the show had shown specifically what Kate was doing to lose weight, that would have given the audience a way to nitpick what she's doing and find fault in her technique. Without that information, the story forces us to focus on Kate's emotional state as the cause of her obesity. This is the source of the mystery in Kate's Season 1 story. Why does Kate feel this way? Why does she have all these mental health issues surrounding her weight? Well, Season 1 doesn't really give us a clear answer, but it does give us a general idea. The structure of the show, cutting back and forth between present and past, implies that something in Kate's childhood caused her issues as an adult. We see that the first person she ever felt inadequate next to was her mom. There's a moment that the show goes back to a few times where Kate sees that her mom's dress is a size small, but she's wearing an XL. It's suggested in a few ways that Kate's obesity as an adult might be her mom's fault, that she gave her a complex of some kind. But we're not given enough specifics for this to be really convincing. Rebecca made her daughter physically and mentally unwell just by, being beautiful? There's also the vague sense that Rebecca pressured Kate to succeed and maybe harped on her weight more than she should have, but it still doesn't quite feel like it adds up. It might also have something to do with Kate's social ostracism. In several scenes from Kate's childhood, we're shown that other girls Kate's age don't really want to hang out with her, with one key moment where they directly call her a pig. Maybe that's what internalized the idea that she's defined by her fatness. But this still feels incomplete. Especially since... Okay, so talking about this can get really weird because the actresses who play Kate are real people, and if I talk about this long enough, I end up pointing out supposed flaws about their real bodies, which is uncomfortable. But I think I have to talk about the casting choices made and what they say about the evolution of Kate's character. What I couldn't help thinking when I watched the flashback scenes is that Kid Kate isn't even fat. People keep saying she is, but she's just not. She's maybe a little chubby, but nothing too outside the norm for a child who's growing and changing. Teenage Kate isn't overweight at all, but adult Kate is pretty definitively obese. If we take this to be an intentional part of the text, then what this tells us is that Kate rapidly gained weight sometime after her childhood. So even if she had a tough relationship with food before, there was something that happened in between these two moments in time that really exacerbated it. We don't know what that thing was, but there is one particular thing that did happen in that time that might be the cause. I'll get to that later though. Let's talk about the next sibling, Randall. Each one of the siblings has their one thing that defines their arc, and for Randall, that thing is that he's adopted. He was an orphaned black kid adopted by a relatively well-off white family, as essentially a replacement for the third triplet that they lost, and that's bound to do a number on you psychologically, especially since he finds his biological father in the first episode, which sets off all kinds of emotions in him. Kate's storylines tended to get a little repetitive after a while, because there are only so many ways to talk about her insecurity and her obesity. But Randall's storylines were always finding new ways to explore this weird dynamic he's found himself in. First, there's his relationship with William. At first, he and Beth aren't sure how to feel about this guy, who abandoned Randall. It takes a while before they slowly come to understand that William is just a good guy who really does love Randall and didn't want to abandon him. But just because William loves Randall doesn't mean that there's never any tension between them. William is dying of cancer. The show hammers in this cruel irony that Randall finally found his father, but he's about to lose him again. And as they make the most of the time they have left, Randall finds that there's a lot of culture clash between the two of them. The story uses flashbacks to explore what it's like for Randall being adopted. Kid Randall faces constant awkwardness trying not to stick out as the one black kid alongside his white siblings. And his parents struggle a lot trying to figure out how to help him through this. Do they treat all their kids the same? Should they make special accommodations to make sure Randall doesn't feel different? Do they embrace his differences, even if that makes him feel like a third wheel to his siblings? There are two storylines that I think encapsulate this really well. The first is episode 4, the one where the Pearson family goes to the pool, and Randall becomes friendly with the other black families there. This is where we meet Yvette, a mom of one of Randall's friends, who serves as one of the main black role models in his childhood. There's this awkward, funny scene where Yvette points out Randall's razor bumps and says that he needs a barber who understands black hair. Rebecca tells her off and says that they don't need her help, but later realizes she was wrong and goes to apologize. This is also the episode where we learn that Randall kept a lookout for any black man in town in case one of them might be his father.
I had this little notebook. And every time I met a new black person, I would put a mark in this notebook. And every time I met a black man, I wondered if, somehow, if that man could possibly be my father.
There's also episode 6, where Jack and Rebecca find out that Randall is way smarter than anyone realized. They're not sure if they should send him to private school because he might be the only black kid there. They go back and forth on it, but Jack decides sending him there is the right thing to do when he finds out that Randall has been pretending to be less smart so that he won't be different from Kevin and Kate. The big twist of the season is the reveal that William didn't really abandon him. Very shortly after adopting him, Rebecca met with William, and William wanted to be a part of Randall's life. But Rebecca told him he had to stay away. We're first shown this in flashbacks, and then it turns into a whole thing, where William accidentally lets it slip to Beth, who pressures Rebecca to confess to Randall, but then Randall finds out right before she can. As you can imagine, Randall felt horribly betrayed by all this. We've been seeing in flashbacks all season how badly he wanted to meet his birth parents, and Rebecca basically robbed that of him. He lost all that time with William, and now he's dying. I feel like it took the show a little bit longer to figure out how they wanted to write Randall compared to the other characters. Very early on, there's a scene between Beth and William where she tells him not to take advantage of Randall because Randall's a selfless guy to a fault. She tells the story of how when Tess was born, he worked himself into a nervous breakdown trying to take care of his family. The reason Beth gives as to why this happened is because Randall is nice, selfless. But that's not what comes through in the text. Randall's defining trait isn't that he's nice. I think all the main characters are really nice and kind. Randall's not exceptional in that way. What the show takes a while to figure out is that Randall's defining trait is that he's an anxious, neurotic mess. He's a perfectionist who always has to be able to do everything. He didn't have a breakdown because he cared about his family too much. He had a breakdown because he puts an insane amount of pressure on himself. This all culminates in episode 15, where everything Randall is dealing with comes together at once. William's cancer is getting worse, while a bunch of important deals at his job are closing in, and Beth leaves town so he has to take care of the kids. During the episode, we can see more and more signs of the stress getting to him, until he has a second nervous breakdown. That's Randall in a nutshell. He seems like he has the perfect life with everything together, but when you look closer, the cracks begin to show. Cracks that, like Kate, were formed by early childhood trauma that we're only beginning to understand. One more thing about Randall. He might be the funniest character in the show. This might seem surprising since he usually comes across as a straight-laced serious guy, but that's the secret. He's always trying to be serious, but he's so easily put off balance when things don't go the way he expects. There are so many awkward moments where he tries to joke around and falls flat on his face, and squirms when somebody brings up a topic he's not prepared to talk about. He's a source of a huge amount of cringe comedy, the best of which is easily the whole "if you buy a farm" moment. So, in one episode, Randall is insecure about presenting at his daughter's school for career day, because he has a Chandler Bing-style boring office job. So he decides to present his job in song, despite the fact that he doesn't know how to sing or play piano.
If you've got a farm, you should know the future cost of corn.
He's constantly doing stuff like that, even if it's usually on a smaller scale. Oh, and then there's the moment where he accidentally drinks a big jug of magic mushrooms. That smash cut was the hardest I laughed the whole season.
Hey, anybody know what happened to my smoothie? It's supposed to last all day. I have these super top shelf mushrooms in it, really gonna open up my world. Half of it's gone. Who drank it?
From there, let's talk about the final Pearson sibling, Kevin. Man, Kevin feels like he's in a different show sometimes. Every time the show cuts from the rest of the family to him doing Hollywood stuff, I feel like I'm watching a filler episode of BoJack Horseman or something. Kevin doesn't have the same kinds of personal struggles as Kate or Randall. His life honestly seems pretty easy. After he quits the Manny, he moves to New York to do live theater. And sure, he's nervous and battling self-doubt, but things generally go well for him. He gets cast in a play, and he starts dating his co-star, Olivia. His life is great. His life seems great. But that's the whole point. The show talks a lot about how Kevin never felt like he got enough attention as a kid. This line from young Kevin kind of summarizes not just his storyline, but the whole show.
We're so busy making sure that Kate's not eating too much.
Kev, calm down.
And Randall's not too adopted. And meanwhile, where's Kevin? Oh, guess what? He's dead.
In the arms of the angel.
Kate and Randall have obvious external struggles. And by comparison, Kevin seems like the golden child who has everything go his way. But all that really means is that you don't see his struggles. More than any other character, Kevin's true thoughts are hidden from the audience and the people around him. Like Kate, He isn't usually upfront about his feelings, and it takes detective work from the audience to figure out what's going on inside his head. But unlike Kate, we don't usually get a reveal at the end of the episode. During the beginning of the season, Kevin spends a lot of time with Olivia. In the play, they're playing a married couple, so Olivia is constantly trying to manufacture situations where they can pretend like they're married. The most notable of which is when she takes him to a funeral, so they can meet a grieving widow and see how losing a spouse should affect you. Kevin is wildly uncomfortable with all this, and you assume it's for the obvious reasons, but his reactions in the scene hint at something deeper. The relationship between Kevin and Olivia is framed as a will they won't they, where you're waiting for this weird casual dating thing to evolve into a deeper connection. But then, very abruptly in the middle of the season, they have a fight, Olivia disappears, and Kevin starts dating Sloane, the writer of the play. It feels super weird in the moment. You're like, oh, yeah, I guess they weren't a good match, but still, I thought that was going somewhere. Then things with Sloane are rocky too, especially when Olivia comes back and Kevin ends up in a love triangle situation. He goes to Toby for advice. Toby is the king of romantic gestures, so he coaches Kevin through deciding on the girl he wants and how to declare his love. But then, Kevin disappears, and he shows up on the doorstep of Sophie, his ex-wife, whom we didn't know about until now.
Hi.
Wait a minute! Who are you?
We're shown that Sophie was Kevin's childhood crush and high school sweetheart before he moved out to LA to become an actor, cheated on her, and got a divorce. But he never stopped loving her. Now things make a lot more sense. Kevin never felt connected to his previous love interest because he was still hung up on Sophie. It's also why he was so uncomfortable with playing a husband in the play. In any other show, with any other character, this moment will be built up all season. But Kevin keeps his cards close to the chest. We weren't even told that he used to be married. You never know what Kevin is really thinking and what's weighing on him. But you do get enough to know that there's something you're not being told. Like I said, Kevin is basically the golden child of the three. This caused him to have a strained relationship with Randall. We see many examples of them fighting through both childhood and adulthood. Kevin always resented Randall for needing more time and attention from their parents because he was adopted and black. Randall never understood why Kevin seemed to hate him, and the resentment became mutual. Each one of them thinks the other has it easier. But underneath all that, they still do love each other. This is shown best in the episode with Randall's nervous breakdown. It's the opening night of Kevin's play, and his whole family is supposed to go, but Randall couldn't bring himself to leave work. He calls Kevin before the show to tell him he can't make it, and Kevin can hear in his voice that something is wrong. So right before he's supposed to go on stage, Kevin bails on the play and goes to Randall's office to comfort him. Which, is framed as a selfless, loving moment, but also, the play wasn't just for him. He almost ruined the hard work that the entire cast and crew put in, and he abandoned Sloane on stage.
David, I had that dream again.
Poor Sloane. She had a rough time this season. She wrote a play, but then her lead actress bailed, so she steps in to act and dates her co-star, but then it becomes increasingly obvious that her co-star doesn't really love her. And then he pulls this on opening night. Kevin doesn't even apologize for this. And we never see how Sloane reacts to it afterwards. I'm not even sure she has any other lines after this episode. The show makes it seem like you should view Kevin ditching the play as wholly selfless, and it doesn't want you thinking about how Sloane feels. Justice for Sloane, that's all I'm saying. The last thing I want to say about Kevin for now is that he's not a very good actor. Whenever we see him actually acting, it's stiff and awkward.
One part of your body, your hair, I want to wake up. I'm sorry.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
But on occasion, he'll dig deep and pull out a great performance, and the show will cut away so we don't get to see it. Which, I get why, what we imagine is more powerful than actually seeing it, but it's still frustrating. So those are the three kids. Now it's time to talk about the parents. Jack and Rebecca are the point of view characters of the flashback portions of the show. From one angle, the point of the flashbacks is mainly to inform the kids' stories in the future, but Jack and Rebecca are also as important and complex as the kids are. We see the ups and downs in their marriage and their attempts to raise 3 children. The real key takeaway from watching them together is this: Jack is perfect in every way. Rebecca is not. I don't mean to come down too hard on Rebecca. She's doing a good job. It's just that Jack is a superhumanly good husband and father. He does everything right. The one flaw he did have was the period when the kids were young and he developed a drinking problem. But when Rebecca confronted him about it, he stopped. He just stopped. That's Jack. He always does what he needs to do and says exactly what he needs to say to make everyone happy. This does make Rebecca look worse by contrast, though. I do think she's a good mom overall, but the show is written to focus in on her mistakes. Like, she might have given Kate a complex about her weight. We're shown moments over and over where she bugs Kate to eat healthy, and that Kate feels inadequate next to her. There's a scene in the present where Rebecca and adult Kate go to the doctor, where Rebecca says,
"Did I do this?"
In that moment, we don't know the answer to that. Her biggest mistake is, of course, keeping William out of Randall's life. We see her entire decision-making process in episode 9, where she's afraid of losing Randall to a parent who's better than she is. The episode ends with her writing William a letter saying how Randall already has a father who gives him everything he needs. And it's so bittersweet because Jack deserves all the praise she's giving him, but also she's totally making the wrong decision.
I hope you take comfort in knowing just how loved Randall is.
That's just how it goes, isn't it? The characters who are perfect, they die, leaving you wanting more, and the more flawed characters get to live. Rebecca and the Pearson family have to deal with her mistakes while they hold on to the memory of their flawless father. Oh, did I not mention that? Yeah, Jack's dead.
In the arms of the angel.
Jack's death plays a huge part in the present-day storylines of all three siblings. Like I said, Kevin tends to hide and bury his emotions, so he never wants to talk about or think about his dad. In the episode where he and Olivia go to the funeral, Kevin ends up talking to the widow of the guy who died, and this brings up a lot of grief. Kevin never felt like he got enough time with his dad, and now his dad doesn't have any more time left to give. Kate had an especially close relationship with Jack. She has his ashes, and she has a hard time even just talking about him, even to Toby. Plus, Kate went from not even fat to obese sometime after Jack died, and this season hints that maybe the trauma of losing him is what pushed her to this. Randall has two perfect dads who died, Jack and William. During the season, William's cancer gets worse and worse, until it becomes clear that he'll be dead soon. The biggest reason why Randall is so mad at Rebecca for keeping them apart is that William won't even be around long enough to be a father to him. During the magic mushroom sequence, Randall hallucinates Jack and vents about his anger towards his mother, and fake Jack helps him forgive her by showing him Rebecca always did what she thought was best. Even in death, Jack is still the perfect father figure. But Randall at least got to spend this last year-ish with William. Towards the end of the season, they make a trip to William's former home in Memphis, where they explore his past. How he wanted to become a musician, how he returned to take care of his sick mother, how he met Randall's mother, how they both got addicted to hard drugs, and how he got clean and moved on with his life. On the last day of the trip, though, William has a medical episode and finally dies. It's again bittersweet because he's gone, but at least he and Randall got the closure they both needed at the end. I'll admit that the main reason this show caught my attention was that I heard a lot of people talk about the mysteries and the twists and turns. The creators described it as the dramedy version of Lost, which, when a show gets compared to Lost, that's basically a bat signal calling me to come check it out. But the two shows don't have many obvious similarities. This Is Us definitely has fewer mysteries by volume. The comparison to Lost, I think, mainly has to do with the fact that both shows cut back and forth between the past and the present, with the past events informing how and why the characters act the way they do in the present. Which does have me worried a little bit about the future seasons of the show. One of the major problems with Lost, besides the mystery stuff that went nowhere, was that the show started running out of events to flash back to. We were shown these characters' past so many times that the writers started really scraping the bottom of the barrel trying to find new stuff to reveal about them. Like the infamous episode showing how Jack got his tattoos. And Lost had like 12 main characters. This Is Us only has 3. Is there really enough relevant stuff in their childhoods to fuel 5 more seasons of story? I'm optimistic because in just one season, each character already got way more backstory than any individual character on Lost, with no signs of the writers running out of ideas. As long as they figure out something else to do with Kate besides harp on her weight, I think it'll work out. There is one major mystery throughout the first season though. How Jack died. In the second episode, Randall is getting ready to host a family get-together, and an older Rebecca shows up, not with Jack, but with Miguel, Jack's best friend. And you're like, what? What happened to Jack? Soon enough, you're told that Jack died, and more details narrow down that he died when the kids were in high school, but we're not told how. This leads us into the final major storyline of the flashbacks. Rebecca has been feeling stifled as a housewife, and she wants to return to working as a singer. Her band books a tour that would take her away from home for a while, and Jack clearly doesn't like the idea of her going, but he keeps his mouth shut. When he finds out that Rebecca used to date her bandleader, Ben, he flips out and tells her she shouldn't go, but she goes anyway. He's so upset by this that he starts drinking again. Jack was being a total jerk here, but he was right about one thing. Ben still has a thing for Rebecca, and on the tour, he tries to kiss her. We get a bit of a fake out at the end of the season here. Kate tells Jack that he needs to go drive to see Rebecca's show and apologize to her. But in the present, Kate tells Toby that it's her fault that her dad died. And then it cuts to Jack drunkenly fumbling with the keys to his car so that he can drive to Rebecca's show drunk. And you're like, is that what Kate meant? She told him to go, so he drove drunk and crashed? But nope, Jack actually makes it to the show. But instead of apologizing, he gets into a fist fight with Ben, and Rebecca quits the tour. She drives him home, and they have another huge fight where they vent all their frustrations with each other. All the dreams they gave up on to raise a family. This time, the fight is so bad that the next morning, they decide they need some time apart, and Jack leaves. And that's where season 1 ends. Still no info on how Jack died. To recap the rest of the storylines from the season, Randall takes time off from work for William's funeral, and he realizes that his job doesn't appreciate him, especially since they sent him pears as a condolence gift, which he's allergic to. So he quits his job in dramatic fashion, and then tells Beth he wants to adopt another kid. After Toby has a heart attack, he and Kate get engaged. Kate decides that she wants to become a singer, like her mother, and that she's tired of her weight holding her back mentally. Kevin salvages his play after bailing on opening night, and it goes really well. So well, in fact, that he gets a call from Ron Howard, offering him a role in a movie. And that's where things are going into season 2. As we head into the next season, here are the questions I have and the things that I'm currently thinking about. How did Jack die? Obviously. What else is there to know about how Jack's death influenced the kid's current mental health struggles? And how will the show continue to handle this relatively small mystery element? Will the show start running out of flashbacks and start spinning its wheels like Lost did? And more generally, will all this start feeling super repetitive, with both past and future Pearson kids refusing to learn or grow, because letting either one change too much screws up the trajectory of the other? I could compare This Is Us to a typical sitcom. In that genre, it's common for characters to barely change at all, and never learn any lessons from what happens to them, because a lot of the comedy comes from watching the characters screw up over and over. But This Is Us isn't a comedy. At some point, these characters will have to change. They'll need to overcome their grief and move beyond their unhealthy coping mechanisms. But there's a risk that letting that happen would mean running out of stories to tell. So we'll see how it goes, I guess. As a reminder, at the time of writing this, I don't know the answers to these questions. I haven't seen season 2 yet. When season 2 starts, it starts off big. The season premiere continues where all the other characters left off. Kevin is filming his movie with Ron Howard, Randall and Beth are preparing for adoption, and Kate is trying to find singing gigs. And Jack and Rebecca are working towards repairing their relationship after their big fight. All that is pretty typical, what you would expect, but then the episode ends with a real doozy of a scene. We flash forward to the night Jack died. Kate, Randall, and some girl we've never seen before are at Miguel's house, and they've just found out Jack is dead. Kevin, meanwhile, is somewhere else, hooking up with Sophie, with no idea what's just happened, and his leg is in a cast. Rebecca, clearly grieving, drives to their house and has a meltdown in the car, outside the burnt ruins of their home. So, whoa, okay, that's how Jack died? He burned to death in a house fire? The scene is still vague about a lot of things, but that seems to be what happened. We're rapidly closing in on the exact details of what happened to Jack and how. Plus, finally, we got some other mysteries to chew on. Who's this random girl with Randall? How did Kevin break his leg? What caused the fire? All questions I hope to see answered. Okay, let's break down what each of the main characters gets up to this season. I left off with Kevin before, so let's pick back up with him first this time. He films his movie and continues to redate Sophie. But during filming, he falls and seriously injures his knee. This is especially bad because he's hurt this knee before. We learn that Kevin wasn't always interested in acting. In high school, he was a football prodigy, but when he hurt his knee, his career ended before it began. It seems like he never really got over getting his dreams crushed. He ends up pushing himself way too hard to finish filming with his injury, which leads to him getting addicted to Vicodin. Man, he just keeps doing BoJack Horseman plots, huh? His drug abuse and drinking destroys him mentally and emotionally. His relationship with Sophie implodes, he isolates himself from friends and family, and it all culminates in him driving drunk and getting arrested while Tess was in the car. Why was she there? I'll get to that later. But the important thing here is that this is a real low point for Kevin. Season 2, Episode 8 is entirely Kevin-focused, and it really distills everything he's going through character-wise. Fresh off his breakup with Sophie, he gets invited to his old high school for an alumni event. He talks to all kinds of people from his hometown who worship him as a famous actor and a hometown hero, but he becomes increasingly uncomfortable with people treating him that way because he sees himself as a worthless failure. The school gives him an achievement award, and in his acceptance speech, he tells the crowd that he isn't worthy of their admiration, or anyone's, which only makes the crowd love him more. He goes out to the football field alone, and basically shouts out everything he's feeling, which is real convenient for me because that means I don't have to figure it out.
And he tries so hard to be strong, and he needs painkillers to get through it. And even when he tries to tell people how pathetic he is, they don't hear it. They just cheer.
He sleeps with an old classmate of his, Charlotte, who's a doctor, and then steals a prescription pad and sneaks out of the house to prescribe himself more Vicodin. Once he's gone, though, he realized that he left his dad's necklace, the one he got in Vietnam and gave him as a teenager, and begs Charlotte to let him come back and find it. She tells him to go to hell, as he deserves, honestly, and he has a total breakdown, in what might be the best individual moment of acting from anyone in the show so far.
Look at me, pain here, okay?
It's very shortly after this that he goes to Randall's, goes drunk driving with Tess, gets arrested, and then gets sent to rehab. But he comes out on the other side pretty okay, all things considered. His recovery goes well, and his movie is on the verge of coming out, and he might have ruined things with Sophie for good, but he's learned from his mistakes. In terms of past Kevin, this season reiterates and doubles down on the idea that Kevin is the ignored one of the family. We're shown constant flashbacks where Kevin has fights with the rest of the family and stresses out about not getting enough attention. Season 2 flashback Kevin is pretty much always angry or upset about something, justified or otherwise. During scenes of him as a teenager, a lot of his angst seems to be fueled by Jack's alcoholism. He acts like he's pretty shaken by what happened between his parents last season. He overhears Jack call his AA sponsor after a bad day, and it really affects him. There was even a moment where Jack and Kevin had an argument where Kevin said he was ashamed of him. I have to wonder if Kevin maybe sees some of Jack's flaws in himself. I mean, he does seem to have inherited Jack's addictive tendencies. In the present day, Kate keeps pushing Kevin to get him to talk about their dad's death instead of pushing it down and ignoring it, to mixed results. What generally happens is that Kevin will bring up their dad in an indirect way to win an argument and then go, "I'm talking about him, isn't that what you wanted?" So he's still got a ways to go. Kate and Toby are engaged, preparing for their wedding. They're still doing the dance of Kate having a mental health crisis every other episode and Toby having to figure out how to help her deal with it. And then, this season, Toby has really solidified himself as the husband of the century. He moves heaven and earth to make Kate happy, even when she doesn't appreciate it. Kate's trying to become a singer, and hold on, I just want to address the Kate job situation for a minute. So before the show starts, and in the first few episodes, Kate worked for Kevin. She was his manager, publicist, whatever the term was. Then when Kevin moved to New York, he fired her, so she was unemployed. There was the episode where she went to stalk Toby's ex-wife and then accidentally got hired at her clothing store. That never came up again, which is fair enough because it's fair to assume that she never formally accepted the job and probably just ghosted her. But then a little later, she got hired as a personal assistant to that rich lady with a daughter, and things were awkward because she might have hired her to convince her daughter to lose weight. It was a whole thing. But it seemed like she decided to stay in that job at the end of the episode. But again, this job is never mentioned again after this. So I guess she quit off screen and she was unemployed when she started singing? I don't know, I was just curious. It's not like any of this actually matters. She seems to have plenty of money. Probably from working for Kevin, and with Toby's generic office job supporting them both. So yeah, Kate is trying to be a singer and build up her confidence. And all of this is dredging up old feelings about comparing herself to her mother. We didn't see a lot of this in the first season, but we learned here that young Kate was super interested in singing. But you know, since Rebecca is a singer, Kate felt like she could never live up to her. There's an episode where young Kate is going to sing at a talent show, and Rebecca helps her practice. But when she overhears Rebecca singing the same song to herself in her flawless Mandy Moore voice, she decides she doesn't want to perform it anymore.
You do know that you are the greatest singer in this house, right? And on the planet, and maybe in the entire universe.
Lean on me when you're not strong. I'll be your friend.
So that was a lie.
Teen Kate applies to a prestigious music school, but she doesn't tell Rebecca, to the point where Rebecca thinks she doesn't care about college at all. In the present, adult Kate is super cagey with her mom about her singing. One of the most memorable episodes between them is Season 2, Episode 2, where Kate has her first paid singing gig, and she specifically tells Rebecca that she doesn't want her there, but she goes anyway. Kate does great, and afterwards, they have this exchange.
You sang incredibly beautifully. You should be so happy right now.
Incredibly beautifully? Mm-hmm. Why do you do that?
Do what? I'm complimenting you. I'm proud of you.
No, you feel sorry for me.
In some ways, this feels like a big overreaction on Kate's part, right? Her mom was complimenting her, wasn't she? But with all the context of the flashbacks, you kinda get it. There are so many moments where Rebecca criticizes young Kate without really meaning to. Some of this is Kate projecting because of her insecurity that her mother is better than her in every way, but also, Rebecca has always been trying to help Kate by pointing out flaws and working on ways to fix them. Their relationship is screwed up, but they both still love each other, and you hope they can move past all this. So Kate's trying to be a singer, getting ready to get married, and I feel like there was something else. Oh yeah, she gets pregnant. She and Toby managed to conceive by accident, which neither of them thought was possible because of Kate's weight and her age. This makes up most of her story in the middle of the season. Kate is terrified of letting herself get excited about a baby because there's such a high probability of miscarriage. When she first finds out, she even tells Toby not to show any excitement around her. Toby has the patience of a freaking saint. But right when the baby starts to feel like a reality, it happens. Kate has a miscarriage. Kate and Toby are devastated. The episode where it happens is probably the saddest episode to date, as Kate and Toby go about their lives trying to cope. Kate handles it by totally shutting it out of her mind, and Toby handles it by doing everything in his power to protect Kate from further pain, going so far as to personally stop the delivery of a baby bathtub they ordered. But then the big moment of the episode comes, where after Kate disappears without warning, and Toby gets worried sick looking for her, he finally loses his cool a little bit and tells her she shouldn't have done that. That makes Kate basically tell him that she's the one who lost the baby, and that her grief is what matters the most. Finally, Toby tells her off and says to her that he lost a baby too, and she doesn't get to treat him like dirt just because she's grieving.
Now, I will be your entire support system through all of this. I will hold your head in my lap, and I will stroke your hair, and I will tell you that everything is going to be okay until the cows come home. But what I will not do, what is not fair for you to do, is to tell me that I wasn't a part of this.
It's such a satisfying moment because Kate has really been taking Toby for granted a lot so far, and even with everything she's going through, she needed someone to call her out. One nice thing that comes out of all this, though, is that it helps Kate and Rebecca get closer. Rebecca figures out what happened and shows up unannounced to their apartment, where Kate breaks down crying in her arms. Rebecca talks about her own grief with Jack, and they're able to bond. Like Kevin, Kate has gone through a lot of hard times this season, but she appears to have come out the other end a somewhat stronger and healthier person. It's hard to tell for sure, though. She hasn't changed enough to display a significant difference in her personality, and there's a decent chance that next season she'll be making all the same mistakes over again. The show still has to do that balancing act with making sure the characters don't change too much at once. Now let's check in with Randall. So I mentioned last time that the writers took a while to figure out how to write Randall, eventually settling into the idea that he's a neurotic type A personality who works himself into a frenzy trying to handle everything all the time. That's continued into this season, but also it's maybe starting to dip into Flanderization territory a little bit, where sometimes it feels like that's his only personality trait. Like, there's the episode that takes place on Super Bowl Sunday. That's the anniversary of the day Jack died, so Randall obsesses over throwing the best, most over-the-top Super Bowl party ever, which he apparently does every year. In the same episode, Annie gets a pet lizard named Mr. McGiggles, who gets lost, and then Beth steps on him. So Randall holds a funeral for the lizard, and he gets genuinely emotional because he's thinking about Jack the whole time. And wasn't this an episode of The Office?
We only got him yesterday. But for many of us, he was the first lizard we ever knew. And we didn't know that we'd never see him again.
That there were lots of other birds out there who cared for him very much.
This is what I mean. There are these moments where Randall starts to dip into cartoon character territory, where he does things that feel out of place in this grounded, serious show. It never gets to the point where it's bad, and it's hard to pick out specific examples, but it's something I noticed. I just worry that as the show goes on, he might get sillier and more exaggerated.
You see that Michael's over there? Used to be a Coles, right?
But anyway, what's Randall been up to this season? Well, he convinced Beth to buy William's old apartment building and become landlords. But don't worry, they're the good kind of landlord. He gets swept up in the idealized image of community he gets from going through William's life and wants to make a difference. This leads to another one of his Randall moments where he promises all the tenants he'll fix everything that's wrong with the building in like a day, and ends up knocking down walls that he shouldn't have, so everyone has to evacuate. This whole apartment plotline is a pretty minor subplot though. The real meat of Randall and Beth's storyline is that they foster a kid, a 12-year-old girl named Deja. Deja's been in and out of the foster system for most of her life, while her biological mom has been in and out of rehab. So she's been through a lot of trauma, and most of the season is a slow bonding as Randall and Beth try to get Deja to trust them. I'm really impressed with the way the writers went about developing this relationship. In a worse TV show or movie, Deja would be totally closed off until one single aha moment made her do a complete 180 and start loving her foster family. Instead, it's a slow process that feels really realistic. For one, Deja isn't immediately hostile. She's uncomfortable and doesn't really want to be there, and she has at least one angry outburst, but by the end of the first episode she's in, she has a nice bonding moment with Annie and Tess, where she's amazed by how nice the whole household is. What really impressed me, though, is that so many of Deja's early episodes end on a downer. In her first episode, she might have had all these nice moments with the family, but at the end of her final scene, she finds out that her mom might be going to prison and smashes Randall's family photo. The episode after that, Deja has been in the house for a while and she's refusing to wash her hair, which is starting to smell. It takes most of the episode for Randall and Beth to bond with her enough to let Beth do her hair. That's when Beth finds out that some of Deja's hair has fallen out because of stress. They have this nice moment where Beth teaches her how to cover up the bald spots. But Deja told this expecting that she would keep it a secret. So when she tells Randall and Randall lets it slip that he knows, Deja flips out, and at the end of the episode, she chops off all her hair.
She told you what I said?
I sense I've made a mistake of some kind.
See what I mean? Just when you think Deja's getting more comfortable, she regresses. You never know how each story arc with her is going to end. Like, in the episode after that, it's the opposite. Deja and Randall go to a gala for Kevin, and Randall unthinkingly grabs Deja's arm. Deja freaks out because she's been physically abused in the past and doesn't appreciate being grabbed. She runs and hides in the bathroom, but when she sees how sorry Randall is, she opens up about her trauma a little bit. The episode starts out with her pulling away and ends with her getting closer. This is the show doing what it does best: characterization through mystery. Deja's actions are informed by her past, which we're left to piece together by watching her interact. It's only later, with the flashback episode about her, that we really see why she is the way she is. Another cool thing that comes up during this storyline is the difference in Randall's and Beth's parenting styles. Randall is all about doing all the things and making a big impression, but in this situation, that won't always work. In the hair episode, he tries to get Deja to open up to him by taking her bowling, which goes poorly when Deja gets into a fight with another girl there, and gets really uncomfortable when Randall steps in to defend her. Randall's arc this season is learning how to cope with failure. He's so used to everything coming easy to him as long as he works hard, but that's not how fostering a kid works. It doesn't matter how hard he tries, he needs to be patient and let Deja come to him. Beth is better at that. She's more, let's say, calculating in her interactions with Deja. In some ways, you could say that's more effective. She's the one who convinces Deja to get her hair done after all. But looking at the season overall, I'm pretty sure Randall and Beth have the same success rate at bonding with Deja. It's hard to say for sure because Randall has a lot more screen time, but as much as Randall's overeager approach blows up in his face a lot, Deja also appreciates how hard he's trying. But halfway through the season, Deja's mom, Shauna, gets out of jail. She wants custody of Deja back, and of course, Randall and Beth don't want that. They've tried so hard to make Deja a part of their family, and also, Shauna doesn't seem like the most stable or responsible parent. But ultimately, they decide that it's not right for them to keep a kid away from her mother. So yeah, Randall and Beth lose Deja. She is no longer their child. She's gone for good. Let's put a pin in that. This show has a fascinating way of writing plot twists. I've never seen anything like it. I mentioned earlier how sometimes plot lines will develop and build and then suddenly get abandoned, with something cutting them off. In season 1, the main example was with Kevin's love triangle. He was building a relationship with Olivia, and then with Sloane, and then suddenly he decides to rush across New York City to find his true love, Sophie, someone we'd never heard of before this moment. And afterwards, Sloane and Olivia are never seen again. It feels a little weird, but hey, that's how real-life romance happens sometimes. In season 2, though, we get even more moments like this. Kate gets pregnant and starts prepping for baby stuff. In any other show, of course she'd carry the baby to term, but here, boom, miscarriage out of nowhere. Baby plot, gone. And after everything the show did to convince us that Kevin and Sophie were soulmates, they still break up. That plotline is gone. And again with Deja, Randall and Beth foster her, and we spend so much time building towards her feeling like part of the family, and then boom, her mother takes her back. Deja plotline, gone. Not all the way gone though. In all these cases, we can assume that these stories will come back around. Just not in the ways you expected when they were first introduced. That's the show's shtick. It introduces plot elements that seem really straightforward, but the ways they tie into the bigger story are never how you expect. In a similar way, the show likes to pull this specific trick, where it shows us a random scene with characters we never met and makes you think you know how they fit in, only to reveal that it was a big misdirect in some way. So, for example, we're shown scenes of this random old couple who are planning to sell their house. Meanwhile, in the same episode, Jack is trying to start up his construction business and is looking to buy a house to flip. At the end of the episode, Rebecca finds Jack a house to buy. So naturally you think, oh, they're gonna buy the old couple's house. But no. The scenes with the old couple actually take place before the kids were even born. They were Jack and Rebecca's neighbors when they first moved in. The real reason we're being shown this is because the old couple was clearing out junk and decided to give the Pearsons their slow cooker, which is the device that starts the fire that burns the house down. I say all of this because after Deja leaves, Randall and Beth talk about trying to foster another kid. They even say,
Maybe. A boy this time.
Cut to a random little boy named Jordan talking to a foster worker who's telling him that they found a place for him to live. So obviously, Jordan is going to be the Pearsons' next foster kid, right? Nope. A few episodes go by, and Randall and Beth are sad about Deja, until one day, Deja calls Randall, and Randall picks up a vibe that something's wrong. He and Beth drive over to Shauna's apartment, only to find Deja and Shauna sleeping in their car because they got evicted. Shauna spent all her money on her deadbeat boyfriend's bail, so she couldn't afford to pay her bills. They bring Deja and Shauna home, and Shauna realizes that she has to give custody of Deja to people who can actually take care of her. So instead of getting a new kid, Deja comes back. Now, I did mostly see this coming while I was watching. A girlfriend of Kevin's is one thing, but we spent way too much time getting invested in Deja for her to just disappear. But all this would have been the lamest fake out ever if the show hadn't built up that expectation that plotlines could go away at any time. It puts in the work to make you believe Deja could be gone for good before bringing her back. But wait, then what about Jordan? Well, here's a twist I really didn't see coming. The Pearsons aren't adopting Jordan. His story actually takes place in the future, and his caseworker is actually Tess, all grown up. Yeah, so Tess has been getting more and more attention this season. We see her react to all the stuff her parents are going through and how it affects her. At the end of the episode where Deja leaves, Tess becomes uncomfortable with how gloomy her parents are acting, and she stows away in Kevin's car to get away from it all, leading to her being in the car when Kevin gets his DUI. With this flash forward, the show is setting up a similar arc for Tess as we've seen with Randall, Kate, and Kevin. We see her childhood, which allows us to see how her upbringing led her to where she ends up as an adult. We don't see a lot of adult Tess though, just a few brief moments. But maybe we'll see more in a future season. I'm consistently amazed at how often the show is able to mislead and misdirect me. For another example, there's a character from the pilot, Dr. Katowski, the doctor who delivered Kevin and Kate. Back in a season 1 flashback, the family runs into him at the hospital years later, because he's sick and about to go into surgery. This is the episode where Toby has a heart attack, and the episode ends in a double cliffhanger with Toby in the present and Dr. K in the past in the operating room in critical condition. The next episode picks up with Toby surviving his heart attack, yay! And I was so relieved by that especially since I didn't watch these episodes back to back, I totally forgot about Dr. K. It totally fooled me into filing him away in the back of my mind, like, oh yeah, he died, right? I ended up not thinking about him at all until he showed up randomly in an episode this season. I'm kind of embarrassed by how caught off guard I was and how badly I got played.
I thought you were dead.
My death was greatly exaggerated.
Now, you might have noticed that my section on each Pearson this season was shorter than last time, and Randall's section was mostly about Deja. That's because this season mixed up the structure a little bit. The first season was very fragmented. Almost every episode had 4 clearly delineated plot lines. One with adult Kevin, one with adult Kate, one with adult Randall, and one in the past from Jack and Rebecca's point of view. During most of the season, characters lived in different states, so there was minimal crossover between them all. But even when characters were together, like when Kevin crashed at Randall's house, each sibling mostly did their own thing. Season 2 changes things up by having more storylines with multiple siblings together. It's not married to the idea of 4 plotlines per episode. There are more episodes with the whole family together. Some episodes focus on other characters besides the big 3. And there are episodes that focus only on a single character. To name a few, there's an episode that shows each of the Pearson siblings in their 20s, a time period we haven't seen before. There's an episode that takes place entirely in the past, based around the family car, showing all the many times Jack gave support to someone in the family while in that car. There's an episode that follows Deja's entire life, from birth to the day she met the Pearsons, finally showing us all the horrible things she went through. And in the middle of the season, there are 3 episodes in a row. The first one is only about Kevin, the second one is only Kate, and the third one is only Randall. Kevin's episode is the one where he breaks down at his old high school. Kate's is when she loses the baby, and in Randall's, that's when Shauna takes custody of Deja back. In these same 3 episodes, each one flashes back to show the same night from all 3 kids' perspectives, the night Kevin hurt his knee. The theme around each kid's plotline is planning for their futures. Kevin meets with a college football recruiter, but he acts rude and dismissive because he thinks he's a good enough football player to get into a better college. Rebecca finds out that Kate's been applying to Berkeley Music School and tries to encourage her. And Jack takes Randall on a tour of Howard University. We get clear visions of what all 3 kids want from college and their futures, but they mostly don't come to pass. Kevin hurts his knee at the end of the episode and can never play football again. Kate didn't go into a music career, at least not right away. We haven't been shown this yet, but it's implied that she gave up singing both because of the stuff with her mom that I already talked about and as a trauma response to Jack's death. And Randall, well, it's inconclusive. It sure seems like he's going to Howard, but we haven't confirmed that, and I'd put money on Jack's death screwing it up. But the most important thing about this series of episodes is that it's the clearest example of the different ways each sibling experienced their childhood, with each of them going through different experiences on the same day. A couple of episodes after all this, after Kevin gets arrested and sent to rehab, the whole family visits him. They have a family therapy session where Kevin confronts the family about feeling like a fifth wheel as a kid. Rebecca was super close with Randall, and Jack was super close with Kate, leading him to feel a little distant from the family. This turns into a big blowout argument. Randall is especially angry because from his point of view, Kevin was the golden child who always had everything work out for him, while he was the adopted black kid who always felt out of place. Kevin gets in Rebecca's face about loving Randall the most and giving him more attention to make up for the fact that he was adopted. And to everyone's surprise, she admits it.
We can stop pretending to be this
No, he
perfect
was
little
just
family.
easier! He was easier and he didn't recoil when I touched him and he wasn't some sullen teenager who was angry at me for no reason and he didn't abandon me and move away after his father died.
Oof. As uncomfortable as this moment is, though, she does have a point. In almost every flashback, Kevin is acting like a brat. Rebecca and Jack didn't always know what to do with him. But then again, Kevin usually acted out because he felt ignored, so it's kind of a chicken-egg situation. At the end of the episode, Randall talks about how he wishes there was a recording of their entire childhood, so they could use the tape to settle any arguments about how it actually was.
I'm just saying, if we had someone filming our entire childhood, objectively, then we never have to debate about anything. Whenever we remembered things differently, we just say, let's go to the videotape like Warner Wolf and then see what was really up.
And that conversation stumbles into the whole point of the show. Because there is a videotape of their childhood. We're watching it. The show is the videotape. The conceit of the show is that we're shown a bunch of adults with various issues, while also being shown their childhoods to see why they're like that. But even though we have the videotape, we still don't know everything. Even after 2 seasons of flashbacks, I still don't know whether Kevin was right in that argument, or what caused Kate's obesity, or exactly how Randall felt about being adopted. We're not shown everything, and even if we were, human beings don't have such a concrete cause and effect to them. The human experience is too complex for us to ever get all the answers. Like, another thing that came up during the rehab argument was Jack. Kevin pointed out that Jack wasn't as perfect as they remember him.
We don't talk about his drinking problem.
Because he beat it, Kev. It was just like a blip.
It's crazy that you even say that.
I'm crazy.
Again, we have the videotape, so to speak. We've been watching flashbacks of Jack all season, so let's go see. Let's finally talk about the Jack and Rebecca plotline of the season. Where we left off, Jack was kicked out of the house for being drunk and ruining Rebecca's music tour. I bet he's about to go on a long journey of self-reflection, where he really digs deep into the root of his... oh, nope, he's back. Yeah, it takes less than 1 full episode for Rebecca to forgive him. It was like, what, a day and a half in universe?
If you can't do the time, don't do the crime. Okay, time's up.
The show keeps alluding to the idea that Jack isn't perfect and that he had some serious flaws, but everything we're shown about him in these flashbacks communicates the exact opposite so far. This season, it's like the big fight from season 1 never even happened. Jack goes into AA and starts recovering, makes up with the family, and goes right back to being Mr. Perfect Dad. He spends a few episodes figuring out how to cope with his addiction, and he never lets it directly affect the family. He comes to realize that it's the stress of a job that he hates that creates his main temptation to drink, so he quits to pursue his dream of running his own construction company, which seemed to be off to a great start. At this point, the Pearson family was pretty much the happiest it's ever been, which is how you know something bad is coming. Now, it's finally time to talk about how Jack died. Because this season, we finally see it happen. The mystery of specifically how Jack died has been built up since almost the beginning of the show, and by the end, it was starting to drive me insane. You get bits and pieces of information during season 1. He died on Super Bowl Sunday when the kids were in high school, but nothing concrete. Like, at the end of the first season, adult Kate says it was her fault, and then cut to Jack getting in a car to drive drunk. And you're like, oh, this is it. He's gonna crash his car and die. But then, he's fine. Then in the season 2 premiere, you see the burnt house, and you go, oh, he died in a fire. But they haven't shown it yet. And there's this seemingly never-ending drip feed of little details that bring you infinitely closer to knowing what happened without knowing what happened. The neighbors give them a slow cooker, and you're like, oh, that's what started the fire. Jack and Rebecca mention that they have to buy batteries, but they forget. And there's a shot lingering on the smoke detector, and you're like, Adult Kate talks about how adopting a dog would come with a lot of emotional baggage for her. And teenage Kate starts spending a ton of time with the family dog Louie, and you're like, that's important somehow. I don't know how, but it's important. And all the while, the flashback timeline keeps getting closer and closer to the actual event. There's the episode that takes place on Super Bowl Sunday during the day, and you're like, Then all 3 kids leave the house for various reasons, and you're like, But then Rebecca is still there, and you're like, And then Kate and Randall both come home, and you're like, Then the slow cooker sparks and starts smoking, and then the episode ends, and you're like, But the next episode is finally it. The fire. Jack wakes up in a burning house and immediately goes into hero dad mode. He gathers Rebecca and Randall into the master bedroom and personally saves Kate. Already, this is not what I was expecting. Since Jack was the only one who died, I kind of assumed that Jack would be alone in the house, except for maybe the dog. But everyone's home, except Kevin. He's out partying with Sophie. Jack gets everyone out the window onto the roof where they can jump to safety. Everyone goes, but Kate realizes that, oh no, they left Louie behind. So Jack runs back into the house to save the dog. Which, can't believe I'm saying this, but no! Leave the dog behind. Screw the dog. Let the dog die.
Gonna kill that dog.
But yeah, that's it. Jack died because he ran back into a burning building to save the family dog. The perfectly tragic end to a perfect dad. Getting himself killed because he couldn't bear to see his kid hurting. And then he comes out.
How are you not dead? I have no idea.
Jack doesn't die in the fire. He does save the dog. Oh, come on, is this another fake out? Except, no, we've been told that he for sure died because of the fire on this date. He didn't die in the fire, apparently, but he's still gonna die within the next few hours. So we get almost an entire episode where the family recovers from the aftermath of the fire, where they laugh all of it off, relieved that nobody got hurt. And it is the most viscerally uncomfortable viewing experience I've ever had. Because you know the worst is about to happen, and it was supposed to have happened already, and you don't know exactly when it's coming or how.
What's all this?
I got the important stuff.
You are something else.
I try.
What the fuck?
While Rebecca takes Jack to the hospital for smoke inhalation, the kids go stay at Miguel's house. If you remember, that's where they were in the season opener when they found out Jack died. They're there with Allison. Right, Allison. Okay, so Allison is Randall's girlfriend. He asked her out a few episodes before. The way she was introduced made her seem so mysterious, but there's not much to her. I'm 90% sure she doesn't even have any speaking lines the whole season. Anyway, Rebecca takes Jack to the hospital to get his smoke inhalation checked out. The doctor says that it's minor and he'll be fine. But then, finally, it happens. Smoke inhalation can put a lot of strain on the heart. So while Rebecca steps out of the room for a minute to call the kids, Jack has a sudden, massive heart attack and dies.
How's Jack?
He's okay. Yeah, he's hanging in there. Hey, can you put the kids on?
Yeah, of course.
Thanks.
Your husband went into cardiac arrest. It was catastrophic, and I'm afraid we've lost him.
Mom, I'm sorry. We were just here for a burn.
Yes.
On his arm.
No.
Jack.
I'm so beyond amazed at what the writers pulled off here. Even as you're given more and more information about Jack's death, there's never any point where you know for sure how it's going to happen. Even when you think you do, the show pulls the rug out from under you and shows you how much you've been wrongly assuming. And I haven't mentioned this yet, but this isn't the season finale. It happens a few episodes earlier than what you're expecting. This all leads to this huge moment where you have just the right mix of knowing it's coming and not knowing it's coming for it to hit hard. Jack is now dead. At this point in the timeline, he's larger than life, the perfect dad who was taken too soon. But let me return to that initial question. Was Kevin right? Was Jack a more flawed character than we've been led to believe? From what we've seen this season, honestly, no, I don't think so. Jack's still as perfect as ever. Every episode after his death has more flashbacks that, if anything, show him in an even more positive light. There are exactly 2 moments in the show so far where Jack's alcoholism drives him to do something bad. The first is the season 1 finale. The second is when he yells at Kevin for being rude to the football recruiter.
And he offers you a C+ student at
You
best,
invited him, not me.
a full ride to a good college.
After which, he apologizes and says he's been on edge because of withdrawal. Even here, though, Jack was well within his rights to be mad at Kevin, and his reaction would be pretty normal coming from any other dad. Teenage Kevin is really disturbed by Jack's addiction, and he even says in that scene that he's embarrassed of him.
It was embarrassing to watch you behave just like you did.
I know the feeling well.
It's like I said, we have the videotape, but we still don't know who's right. Either Kevin is projecting, and he sees the worst in his dad because they share addictive tendencies, or there are key moments with Jack that show an ugly side to him, but we haven't seen them yet. We'll see if Season 3 explores this at all. The season ends with Kate and Toby's wedding. Kate wants to use Jack's old t-shirt as her something old, but they forget to pack it, and Kate freaks out. This is yet another moment where Kate loses her mind about something, and Toby has to pick up the pieces. But this time, it all seems to work out okay. Kate goes for a drive alone without telling anyone, and they all think she's having a meltdown, but she's just going to the place where Jack's ashes were scattered to talk about her wedding. She's been having these dreams of a world where Jack never died, and he and Rebecca are renewing their vows. It's all very sweet, but Kate keeps wondering why Toby isn't in these dreams, until she realizes that Toby is Jack. As in, he fills the same role that Jack did, the good man who can support her. So she goes back and has her wedding. During all this, we meet Toby's parents, who are, terrible. And they tell Toby that they think Kate is a bad fit for him. They point out how he always has to walk on eggshells to keep her happy. Which, yeah, they're not completely wrong, but they're also overreaching. I know I've been hard on Kate this season, but she's not as much of a mess as I made her out to be. She and Toby are a good match. Toby dotes on her a lot, but they also support each other in a healthy way. Toby tells his parents as much and marries Kate anyway. The other plotline this episode is Deja, and how she's struggling to settle in for the second time after her mom gave her up. This story is another one of those where it ends on a sudden downer. Deja slowly comes out of her shell during the wedding, especially after Beth's cousin Zoe talks to her. Zoe also lost her parents at a young age, so they bond a little. It looks like Deja is doing better, but then Toby's mom says to her that she and Randall look alike, assuming that Randall is her biological father. So Deja goes outside and smashes up Randall's car. The episode ends just like the season opener did, with a bunch of out-of-context clips from previously unseen parts of the timeline to build intrigue for the future. Kevin is on a plane with Zoe, the implication being that they're now dating. Toby is suffering from some kind of depressive episode, and we check back in on adult Tess, who's with her dad as she gets ready to meet somebody, doesn't say who. So that was season 2. Before we move on, let me address the questions I asked at the top of this section. Is the show in danger of running out of story to tell, running out of flashbacks? So far, no. There's still plenty more to explore in the past, and the characters in both timelines still have developing to do. And what about the mysteries? How did that play out? The one main mystery, how Jack died, is solved. We've seen it. But there are still hints of more of a mystery element to come. We continue with the method of teasing things to come by showing little snippets of time periods we haven't seen. It makes you go, how and why is this going to happen? I want to keep watching to find out. And there is one more concrete mystery introduced this season. Jack's brother. We learned that before we ever met him, Jack had a brother, Nicky, who died in Vietnam. The necklace that Jack gave to Kevin belonged to him. We don't know anything about him because Jack almost never talks about him. He never wants to talk about him, or anything he saw in Vietnam for that matter. Clearly, this is building to something, and I want to find out what. We're up to season 3. Things to expect from this season. First, we'll find out more about Nicky. Also, we've seen how Jack died, so there'll be some flashbacks showing the Pearsons dealing with the aftermath. And of course, we'll pick up with all the plotlines set up in the season 2 finale. Deja adjusting to her new home, Kevin dating Zoe, and hopefully some more detail on that future Tess storyline. In general, I hope to see more of Tess. She's shaping up to be one of the more interesting side characters. The season 3 opener is called $9, because the main flashback is about how Jack takes Rebecca on their first date, but all he has is $9. This takes place directly after they first met, while he was trying to rob a bar, because he has no money. Did I mention that? I don't think I did. He met Rebecca as he was about to rob the bar where she was performing. Jack might be the perfect dad, but we've definitely seen him do some questionable things before the kids were born. He's all stressed out because he wants to impress her. He takes her to a carnival because it's cheap. Despite their initial chemistry, they have a hard time finding a rhythm in conversation, and Jack runs out of money pretty much right away. Rebecca figures this out when it starts raining and Jack makes an excuse not to buy an umbrella. Jack drives her home and comes clean about his lack of money and struggles since coming back from Vietnam. He apologizes, but Rebecca still kisses him goodnight, with the implied promise of future dates. Kate and Toby are trying to get pregnant again. It's not working, so they go to a fertility doctor and decide to try IVF. The issue is that the procedure is really dangerous for Kate because of her weight, and even so, it still has a high chance of failure. They decide to go through with it, and Kate is really excited, but Toby is terrified of everything that could go wrong. Besides Kate's weight, part of why they can't get pregnant is that Toby's antidepressants lower his sperm count, so without telling Kate, he stops taking them. We now know how the flash forward at the end of season 2 happened, with Toby laying in bed all depressed. Deja has been in therapy since she smashed up Randall's car, but she seems mostly better now. Randall wants to formally adopt her. She says no at first, but changes her mind pretty quick. She goes to visit her biological father, whom we had never heard anything about, to basically tell him off and say that she's lucky she found an adoptive family who loves her. It's pretty similar to what Randall had planned to do with William, actually. That's a big motif of the storyline. Randall was also adopted, and he wants Deja to have a good home and family like he did. Kevin and Zoe hooked up at the wedding and had been seeing each other in secret. Beth finds out though, and the whole episode, you think she's mad at Kevin for dating her family member, because he's kind of a heartbreaker and Beth already doesn't get along with him well, but it turns out that it's the opposite. She doesn't want Kevin to date Zoe because Zoe is gonna hurt him. Her exact words are that
she eats men up and spits them out and you won't stand a chance.
But Kevin wants to stick it out, so we'll see how it goes. Let's take a look at the different through lines this season, starting with Randall. He spends more and more time at William's apartment building in Philly, and he starts to notice all the problems in the area that the city government isn't fixing. The district city councilman, Saul Brown, is a real piece of work who never does anything because he's an incumbent who's never had to work to earn his votes. So Randall decides that he should run for city council in Philadelphia, even though he doesn't live there. Now, this plotline gets a little weird because, to start, the people of this neighborhood are fiercely loyal to Saul Brown. They vote for him not just because they think they have to, but because they really feel like he's a great councilman. And then here comes Randall, a rich guy who lives in another state, who doesn't know the neighborhood at all, and is only allowed to run because he's a landlord here. And his main motivation for running is that he thinks the neighborhood is crappy and run down, and he thinks he could do a better job fixing its problems than the people who actually live there. And do you ever think he stopped to wonder,
are we the baddies?
I'm exaggerating, but not by that much. Early in the season, that's really where I thought the story was going. That Randall was pretty much only running to serve his ego, and that he overstepped. That was the plotline of the episode where he decided to run. He visited the local community center, noticed how it was falling apart, and spent the whole day trying to get Councilman Brown to fix it. Brown wouldn't help, and then the woman who runs the center chews Randall out for only seeing the flaws of this place, without thinking about what the people living here want. I thought that obviously the lesson here was that Randall should back off and take the time to learn more about the community instead of inserting himself into their problems. But nope. The episode ends with him saying he wants to run for council. Randall always acts like this.
Everybody's an idiot except for me.
So you'd think he'd be proved wrong at some point. The way it was all framed, I couldn't help but think that maybe Saul Brown had a good reason for not fixing the community center. Maybe there's a good reason why all the people are so devoted to him, and they're not all just dumb sheep who vote without thinking. But the show is all in on Councilman Randall this season, and he's totally vindicated by the end. He starts by allying with the district's Korean population, and he hires a local named Jae-won to be his campaign manager. Saul Brown proves to be exactly as corrupt and useless as Randall thought he was, with Randall reading off a list of broken promises he made at a debate, and finding out that he paid off the cops to cover up a drunk driving charge. Randall goes from having almost no support to winning, and the messaging of the storyline gets really confused. I guess the people's loyalty to Saul Brown was just completely unfounded, and they were all just gullible idiots. I guess the lesson is that if some rich businessman from out of town comes and says he knows what's best for you, you should listen to him. This plotline was fun whenever I wasn't thinking about it too hard, but the implications are just kind of weird. The show is less interested in those questions, though, and is much more interested in the strain that running for council puts on Randall's family life. Campaigning takes a lot of time and energy, and on top of that, he lives 3 hours away and has to drive back and forth. There comes a point where Beth puts her foot down and tells him to drop out of the race because he needs to be there for his kids, and Randall straight up tells her no. This puts a strain on their marriage that continues all the way through the end of the season, but I'll touch on that again later. After she gets adopted, Deja has dramatically reduced screen time this season. She's basically settled into the Pearson household, and the narrative mostly treats her as equal to the other two kids. If anything, Tess gets more attention this season because she comes out as gay.
I'm Tess Pearson, and I'm gay.
Dude, this is a Wendy's.
As for the Kevin storyline, he continues to date Zoe. The pattern they fall into is that Zoe never wants to take the next step in their relationship because she's allergic to commitment. But Kevin really loves and cares about her, gently prodding her over time to get more serious with him. What we eventually learn is that she's so closed off because her father sexually abused her as a child, so it's hard for her to feel safe around men. It seems like Kevin is able to break down a lot of those emotional barriers, though, and I'd say the two of them are a pretty healthy couple. That's only part of Kevin's story, though. Most of it is about him unraveling the mystery of what happened to his dad while he was in Vietnam. Early in the season, he realizes that Jack never told him about anything that happened to him during the war, and he regrets not asking when he had the chance. So, fresh off his arc last season, where he's no longer shutting out any thoughts of his dad, he goes digging for any information about Jack's tour that he can, with the help of Zoe, who's an investigative journalist and documentarian. This eventually leads to him traveling to Vietnam to visit the places his dad went there and talk to the people who might have known him. This is a nice change of pace, having a mystery that's through the point of view of a character doing detective work, instead of the story just not telling me things. As he discovers more and more, we finally get some direct flashbacks that show Jack in Vietnam, and we also get to know the ever-mysterious Nikki. Ever since they were kids, Jack was always the protector of his weaker, scared little brother, especially from their abusive alcoholic dad. But Nikki gets drafted. They almost go through with a plan for him to run away to Canada, but Nikki decides that for once in his life, he'll face danger and make his family proud. Not too long after, Jack enlists, so that he can try to find Nikki and keep being his protector. He has some trouble enlisting at first because he has a minor heart condition. It's not stated, but the implication is that this heart condition contributes to his heart attack and death later. He goes to Vietnam, becomes a sergeant, sees all kinds of horrors as he tries and fails to keep all his men alive, and eventually tracks down his brother. When Jack meets back up with Nikki, Nikki's all kinds of messed up. He wasn't built for war, and his mind couldn't take it, so he started abusing drugs. He's also become super racist, hating the Vietnamese people for killing the people around him. So Jack gets permission to take Nikki to the fishing village where his squad is stationed to try and get his head on straight. It doesn't go super well. Their relationship has been strained since they last left each other, and Nikki is still using drugs in secret. But they start to come back around to each other. Until one day, Jack hears a grenade explode out in the water. Somebody tells him they think one of their guys was out there. This is the moment, isn't it? This is where Nikki dies. Except, we don't actually see what happened in this episode. It cuts off before Jack arrives at the scene. So something fishy is going on here. Sure enough, Kevin and Zoe talk to Vietnamese locals who were there at the time and dig through military death records, and they find out that Nikki didn't die in Vietnam. He's actually still alive. They end up tracking Nikki down, and all three Pearson siblings get together and visit him in this trailer in the middle of nowhere. Here's what actually happened when that explosion went off. Nikki woke up hungover to see a little Vietnamese boy staring at him. They start to joke around and play with each other, which is a surprise to us watching because we've seen so much about how Nikki hates this country and all of its people. This moment shows us he's not all the way gone. Nikki then made the stupid decision to take the kid fishing using grenades. He fumbled a grenade after pulling the pin and accidentally blew up the boat, and the kid died, but he survived. Jack was furious and told him he's done protecting him.
He's just a kid! I'm done! I'm done!
The most heartbreaking part of it all is that Jack assumes he blew the kid up on purpose because he's screwed up and full of hate, when we know this was really a moment of him trying to be better. Nikki ended up getting sent home for psychiatric reasons and lives the rest of his life in a crummy trailer, never leaving because of severe PTSD and agoraphobia. Jack told everyone in his life that his brother was dead because he might as well be. Finding Nikki isn't the triumph we all hoped it to be. Nikki is isolated, depressed, and very resistant to anyone helping him. Kevin's been most invested in this mystery the whole time, so he's really shaken up by seeing how beaten down Nikki is. The whole family gets to meet him, and after a lot of pushing from Kevin, he agrees to visit a veterans center, but there's no magic cure that makes everything that happened go away. In a moment of weakness, alone in Nikki's trailer, Kevin has a relapse and drinks a bottle of Nikki's whiskey. That leads to a week-long drinking binge that he hides from his family and from Zoe. Why did this make Kevin start drinking again? I mean, yeah, Nikki's life is upsetting to hear about, but I feel like there's a more specific trigger for Kevin here that isn't really stated. It was probably that Kevin now has 2 family members show the same addictive tendencies that he inherited. 3 if you count his grandfather. Or maybe it's just the simple fact that Kevin loves to help people, and he couldn't help Nikki. A big question surrounding Kevin as a character is he a jerk? Is he a bad person? Of the other main characters, Kevin is the most flawed. He makes the most mistakes that hurt the people around him. I really think that more than in the past, the show wants you to think about that. He's really hard to judge objectively because he and Justin Hartley are so effortlessly charismatic. You just look at him and see that smile, and you can't help but like him. Also, the way he's written, he has this golden retriever vibe to him, where he's kind of dopey and not the smartest, so it's hard to hold a lot of what he does against him.
Love your taste in art. I love that one. That is a flower that's supposed to kind of look like a vagina, right?
My daughter did that when she was 7.
His negative actions are usually thoughtless, but not cruel. Think of all the times he doesn't seem to notice when Beth is annoyed with him. Times like when he moved into her house, into her home office, without really ever asking if it was okay. But then he also has these self-destructive tendencies, where he sabotages his relationships with people for no reason. Like, with both times he started drinking, he lied and kept it hidden, when there was no reason why he had to. The second time around, this is especially hurtful for Zoe with all of her trust issues. She even specifically says that she wasn't upset by his relapse, she's only upset that he lied about it. Teenage Kevin is even worse. The actor doesn't have Justin Hartley charisma, but either way, he's written to be completely insufferable. Every scene with him for the last 2 seasons has shown only the worst in him. Every word that comes out of his mouth is so callous and unnecessarily cruel. In this season, he at least has the excuse that his dad just died, but he was honestly worse in season 2. You just want to shake him and tell him to shut up constantly. But then, running parallel in the episode where he helps Nikki, there's a flashback story with Kid Kevin. He really wants to go to the mall and get an autograph from a baseball player, and he's kind of a brat about it. But when he finally gets there, Rebecca finds out it's because he heard the player might be traded, and he wanted to give the guy an itinerary of cool things to do in his new city to make sure he would be happy there. I wouldn't call Kevin a good person or a bad person, especially since the show doesn't seem to believe in that kind of morality anyway. The point of all this is to show that even if Kevin isn't always the nicest and doesn't know how to show love, he does care a lot about the people around him. Earlier, I wondered if the show's approach to flashbacks would change at all now that we've seen how Jack died. And it did a little. We got way more focus on stories earlier in the timeline, when Jack was in Vietnam and when he first started dating Rebecca. But we still get flashbacks with the teenagers after Jack is dead as they finish high school. And a few with the kids here and there. One flashback worth noting is the sequin fight, where Jack is home with Kate and Randall, and because he's fighting alcohol withdrawal, he snaps at them for making a mess with their art project and breaks a plate. In the present, Randall remembers all of this, but Kate doesn't at all. All she remembers is what came after, when Jack turned the mood around by making an even bigger mess to show he wasn't upset. This is another one of those let's go to the videotape moments I talked about earlier. Who remembers this event correctly? Maybe it's both of them. Is Jack a good or bad parent? This moment shows a rare misstep from him, but as Randall says, he was good enough to make the good things stick out in your memory. All of that leads into Kate's storyline for the season. She's dead set on IVF despite the risks, and despite everyone else, even Toby, thinking it's a bad idea. Rebecca is especially worried and wonders why Kate won't consider adoption instead, and Kate says she wants to pass on Jack's genes. Randall's not a fan when he hears that, but it's not an unreasonable desire, especially given how close Kate and Jack were. Most of Kate's story is tied to pregnancy, the IVF procedures, and the idea of parenting. She has to have egg retrieval surgery, which is the dangerous part. And there's a moment where she doesn't wake up from the anesthesia like she's supposed to. Inside Kate's head, there's a dream sequence where all 3 versions of Kate meet up and talk about motherhood. Teenage Kate takes on the role of a sort of devil on the shoulder, the part of Kate's brain telling her to give up and let the anesthesia kill her.
Nothing ever works out for us. We're always under that black cloud, remember?
This is jarring to see because in all stages of her life, Kate is a pretty happy and kind person. But this season, we see teen Kate after her dad died. She's a lot more bitter and prone to snapping at people. We also get more concrete confirmation that it was her grief that caused her obesity, with several moments that show her stress eating. But don't worry, Kate obviously survives this, and they get the eggs they need. Toby is dealing with all the stress of watching his wife go through life-threatening surgery, and the knowledge that it probably won't even work, all while being secretly off his antidepressants. It doesn't take long for his depression to come down with full force, which means he lays in bed all day. Yeah, that's basically his only symptom. He lays in bed. I'm not an expert in depression, but this doesn't feel like a very nuanced portrayal here. This is all you see of his depression. The story doesn't really get into his perspective at all either. We just see Kate on the outside looking in and hoping that Toby will get out of bed. And this whole plotline is over before long. Toby gets back on his antidepressants after Kate makes him, and after a few episodes he goes, "You know what? I think I will get out of bed today." I don't know, I think the storyline missed the mark. Against all odds, the IVF works. The embryo takes and Kate's pregnant again. But stress is high because she's still at risk for another miscarriage. She has to stop singing because the stress of travel is too much for the fetus. But Toby encourages her to enroll at community college and finish up her degree. In flashbacks, we learn more concretely that Kate never finished up her application to music school after her dad died. With her community college credits, she finally gets her degree, and Toby throws her a big party. But while she's there, her water breaks. Way too early. And here we get the tensest, most emotional, and most stressful episode of the show to date. Season 3, Episode 15, The Waiting Room. It's a bottle episode where the entire Pearson family gathers in the waiting room of the hospital while Kate and Toby are in the maternity ward, hoping nothing bad happens to Kate or the baby. Everyone is super stressed out and constantly bickering with each other over stupid stuff. Every grievance comes out all at once because they're all too stressed to talk without a filter. Kevin keeps fighting with the doctors for not telling them anything. Kevin and Randall have their usual pissing contest, where Kevin resents Randall for having it all together and being the de facto head of the Pearson family, but with the added anger about Randall leaving him to deal with Nikki alone. Kevin and Zoe fight about him hiding his relapse. Randall and Beth argue about how to balance their jobs and the kids. They get mad at Rebecca and Miguel for thinking about moving to California for Kate instead of staying near them. Miguel keeps trying to calm people down with stupid games, and everyone keeps telling him to shut up. Anytime somebody else comes in and sits down, they find some reason to be annoyed with them. And Rebecca is just fully dissociating because all this reminds her too much of the hospital visit where Jack died. It's such a bad time. I can't remember the last episode of a TV show that made me squirm like this. It feels like you're trapped in there with them. You just want everyone to get out of there before they say something they'll regret. Or say more things they'll regret. But you also know that they won't leave because they need to be there for Kate.
I know you feel like
This family stays.
At the very least, I knew that Kate and the baby would be okay, because this show isn't that dark. There's no way it would make me sit through all this and then also have the baby die. Kate gives birth, but the baby is still really premature, really small, and needs machines to breathe on his own. They name the baby Jack, unsurprisingly. And Toby, after an entire season of being emotionally distant because he never really believed any of this would work, finally lets himself love his infant son. Things with the baby are good, for now. Jack is looking like he'll survive and grow up. There's one more piece to Kate's story this season, and that's Rebecca. It's long been established that Kate doesn't always get along with her mother because she always felt insecure trying to live up to her. That continues here with everything related to pregnancy. Early on, Rebecca worries that Kate's making the wrong decision with IVF, and Kate doesn't like hearing that. But more importantly, Kate's going to be a mom now. And now there's even more reason for insecurity, as she has to live up to the relative greatness of her own mom. After Jack is born, Kate actually gets mad at Rebecca for helping too much. Thankfully, Kate's done some growing since last season. She's able to recognize when she's overreacting and apologize. And Rebecca is always the first person she calls when there's baby news. And it looks like Rebecca and Miguel are moving to be near her, so I look forward to seeing their relationship develop even further. And you know, speaking of, I think it's finally time that I talk about Miguel some more. As a refresher, Miguel was Jack's co-worker and best friend. He and his wife were close with Jack and Rebecca, but then they got divorced, and then Jack died, and eventually, Miguel and Rebecca got married. I've barely mentioned him, even though he's been around a lot. And that's because there isn't much to say about him. The whole joke about him is that nobody ever wants him around. He awkwardly took Jack's place after he died, and his presence makes everyone uncomfortable, even though he's a nice guy, and he and Rebecca do love each other. From a writing standpoint, he's such a weird case because given how the show always tries to portray every character with complexity, he's really one note. He doesn't ever get much to do, and both in and out of universe, all he ever gets to be is Rebecca's new husband. Anytime he's given any focus at all, it's to show you how weird he feels being inserted into this family. Because he's presented so flatly, you end up feeling as awkward as the Pearsons do whenever he's around. Like, you just want him to go away half the time. This season, though, Miguel finally has some things to do. There's the usual stuff about him not fitting in, but even those stories get taken a little more seriously. Like, he has a nice moment with Kate's friend Madison in the waiting room episode, where they both talk about how hard it can be to get involved in Pearson family stuff, and he gives her some pointers. But there's other stuff too. His ex-wife got custody of his kids, who he'd never seen before now. And there's an episode where he and Rebecca have Thanksgiving with them, and we get the reversal, where they don't like Rebecca hanging around. And in flashbacks, we see how Miguel was able to comfort Rebecca in her grief in the aftermath of Jack's death. He's not one note anymore. He's slightly more than one note. He's 2 note? And more like 1.5 note. I have no idea if he'll develop more complexity in the second half of the show, or if he'll keep being a punchline. Miguel's not alone in feeling like an outsider. He, Toby, and Beth talk a lot about how they've all married into the family, and how weird it is trying to penetrate the super deep bond the Pearsons have with each other. Toby, at least, gets treated like another main character in the narrative, but Miguel and Beth get sidelined a lot. At least at first. Because now, it's time to circle back around to Beth. Early on in the show, it felt like she kind of faded into the background a lot. She was just Randall's wife. Especially in the first season, she took a back seat while the story developed the relationship between Randall and William. She still got more to do than Miguel, but I constantly felt like she was underutilized because what we did see of her proved that she was a really interesting character. My favorite thing about her is the way she's written as the straight woman, reacting to the ridiculous stuff the other characters do. She's the perfect combination of being more normal and emotionally stable than the Pearsons, but also always speaks her mind. So she can be the audience surrogate to give voice to what we're thinking. This show isn't a comedy, it's presented as a serious emotional drama. So when the show is being funny, it doesn't always register until Beth reacts to it.
The future cost of corn. So
Just look away. Beth has long been deserving of more focus, and in season 3, we finally get it. When Randall decides to run for town council, Beth is supportive, but also, it's a weird, impractical, ridiculous pipe dream, just like most of the stuff Randall does. She tells him to promise to drop out of the race if it ever becomes too much for them to handle, which he agrees to. After his first debate with Saul Brown, though, Brown still has 90% of the vote, and the kids need him more and more, so Beth tells him to drop out, and he says no. That plants the seeds for what comes later. Alongside all this, Beth also gets laid off from her job. It's tough for her because she loved her job, and as she looks for a new one, she feels stuck at home while Randall is out working towards his dream. Well, his dream for this year. For most of the show, Randall and Beth have been a pretty rock-solid couple, minus a brief fight over Deja in season 2. But there are cracks showing here. And a lot of what we see in this storyline also lines up in a metatextual way. Both in their lives and in the narrative, Beth takes a backseat to whatever Randall wants to do. He gets all the focus, and he gets to chase his dreams, and Beth is also there, just hanging out and being supportive. She never gets the focus. She never gets to do what she wants to do. All that really comes into focus when we finally get an entire episode dedicated just to Beth. We find out that when she was a kid, she wanted to be a professional dancer. That's something that's never come up before, somehow, despite the fact that Beth is an important character and this is a crucial part of her backstory. Because, again, she never gets the focus and attention she deserves. She trained really hard as a kid, but she didn't quite have enough talent to go pro. It was devastating for her. Beth's mother was supportive, but also impossible to please. She's all about drive, focus, commitment. When she and Beth learned that Beth wasn't good enough at dancing, she immediately went, okay, you have to give up dancing now. You tried, but your dream is dead. Go get a real job.
Watch this, Lise. You can actually pinpoint the second when his heart rips in half.
But I just don't see dance as a path for you.
She was probably harsher than normal then because it was right after Beth's father died of lung cancer. And I have to point out how similar this story is to Randall and the Pearsons. Beth's dad was also a super sweet, kind, good dad. The best parent a kid could ask for, who died while his kids were in high school. But while the Pearsons talk about their dad constantly, this is the first time we're ever hearing about Beth's dad. Everything about this story serves to highlight the fact that the Pearsons aren't the only people in the universe and that other people also have trauma. The episode ends with present-day Beth deciding that she wants to be a dance teacher. It's all good and wholesome to see Beth following her dreams, but the problem is that the job has irregular hours, and between that and Randall's campaign, they don't have time for kids or each other. The arguing and resentment between them grows as they fight about how to manage their time and finances, and it becomes increasingly clear that Randall thinks Beth's new job is stupid. It all culminates in a big blowout fight between them after Randall thoughtlessly insults her job. This whole argument is eerily similar to the one between Jack and Rebecca that Randall accidentally overheard back in the day.
Career? You are a 40-year-old woman singing covers in pubs. That is not a career, Rebecca. That is ridiculous.
I hope you're off having fun talking about how to teach bored housewives how to twirl better. Grow the hell up, Beth.
Beth vents about how, for their entire marriage, they've always done what Randall wanted. Every time Beth disagrees or wants something of her own, Randall manages to steamroll past and get what he wants. Alongside this, we get an entire episode of flashbacks showing exactly this over the years. Beth has an opinion about something, and Randall respects her opinion, but he keeps prodding and giving her his winning smile and the right speeches until Beth changes her mind. I have to say, this is one of the most nuanced and interesting couple fights I've seen on TV. I hate it when fictional couples fight over stupid reasons just so the story can have drama. This is not that. Both sides have a legitimate reason to feel the way they feel, and there's not an easy way to reconcile. Based on the way I've framed things, you can probably guess that I'm mostly on Beth's side. It's been 3 seasons of The Randall Show, so I sympathize with Beth feeling pushed aside. But it's not like Randall was doing anything wrong either, besides insulting her job. He's just being Randall, firmly asserting what he wants. He's not ignoring Beth's wants or telling her no. Beth just folds on her own every time. The phrase Beth uses is that she gets consumed by him. Randall is just so much that he sucks people into his orbit and makes them subordinate to his wants and needs. And that's true in a meta way as well. None of Randall's immediate family were ever allowed to be more important to the narrative than he was. They all existed to further his story. Now that Beth has a dream that she can't let go of, conflict was inevitable. That takes us all the way to the season 3 finale. Randall and Beth are at an impasse where they're not sure how to solve their time commitment problem, and they're not sure how to forgive each other for the hurtful things they said to each other. So Deja takes Randall aside to tell him basically, "You're insanely lucky to have the life you live with a great wife like Beth. Don't screw it up." Beth has a similar realization of her own, where she also decides that her dream job isn't exactly what she wants it to be in the first place. They meet up, apologize, and Beth lays out a plan for the whole family to move to Philadelphia, where Randall can be closer to his job and where Beth can open up her own dance studio. Financially, it might be tricky, but they're willing to try to make it work. A happy ending where the relationship is stronger than before. That's where we leave things with them for the finale. Meanwhile, Kate and Toby take baby Jack home from the hospital. And Kevin and Zoe break up. Yeah, after everything they went through building trust and getting closer together, they discover that Zoe never wants to have kids, but Kevin really wants to be a dad. Kevin's relationship with kids has come up periodically during the season. There's a point where Kate casually says he's too flaky to ever settle down and raise a family, which really hits a nerve. And his connection to Tess and Annie is such an underappreciated, wholesome part of the show.
I was gonna invite her to my premiere. You know, sort of like I was asking her prom, you know what I mean? That'd be kind of cute. What do you think? Do you think she'd like that?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Kevin says he's willing to give up that dream for Zoe, but Zoe can't keep that from him, and she breaks up with him. The last thing we see in the finale is another flash forward to adult Tess. We've been getting these periodically, even though we hardly get any info from them. We're eventually told that the person Tess is going to see is, quote, Randall's mother. There's some ambiguity there, like, could this mean Randall's biological mother? And also, Randall and Beth are in different locations in these segments, so seeing this alongside them fighting in the present, it's meant to make you think, oh, are they divorced? Apparently not, for now at least. They and the entire Pearson family go to Kevin's house, where we see that he does have kids, although we don't see their mother. Jack is briefly name-dropped, confirming that he survives to adulthood. And we see that the reason everyone is gathering is because an ancient Rebecca is ready to die soon. And that's season 3. I might have given the impression that I didn't like this season as much, but that's not true. There were a few nitpicks I had, but overall, this season made a lot of bold and interesting choices. I've been worried that the show could get too repetitive over time, but this season kept things fresh. I'm especially happy with Kate and Randall, because they each finally got out from under their one quality that had been defining their storylines. Kate's story is finally about more than just her weight. It's about her pregnancy and her desire for motherhood, and her career goals. And Randall isn't just the adopted kid anymore. It comes up briefly, like when people in Philadelphia tell him he doesn't belong there, he thinks about how he doesn't belong anywhere. But between his campaign and his fights with Beth, we saw a different side to him. Instead of going straight into the next season, I want to pause and take a minute to talk about a different aspect of the show. The makeup. We see these characters across many periods of their lives. Besides kid versions of adult characters where you have to cast a different actor, the show mostly relies on makeup and acting choices to make the actors look different ages. For the most part, they do it really well. The thing that really made me sit down and think about this was seeing old Nikki. Unlike most characters, they cast a different actor to play him, and I never thought twice about it. I just assumed it was the same guy with really good makeup. For everyone else though, let's go through them one by one and see how they make actors seem younger or older. For Kevin and Kate, there isn't much range they had to cover, so they're relatively simple. The only time we've seen these actors play a different age is for the one episode where they're in their 20s. Kevin looks exactly the same, which checks out. He feels like he's the kind of guy who barely ages. Kate has bangs and seems to wear more makeup in general than she does in the present. The extra makeup covers the signs of the actor's age, but it also signals that Kate might be more insecure about her looks at this time in her life. Randall has a little more to do. Present-day Randall feels so mature, which might have more to do with his personality than the way he looks, but it's hard to imagine him younger. When he's in his 20s, he's clean-shaven and wears more loose-fitting clothing. It looks pretty silly, though. There's also old Randall in the future. They do the stuff you'd expect, giving him gray hair, light wrinkles, and old man clothes, but what really pulls it all together is the glasses. They really make him look old. With Miguel, all they seem to do is dye his hair gray, but it works well enough. He feels like he's aged a lot, and it looks pretty real at a glance. Of course, how often are you really paying attention to Miguel? The way they handle Jack is really interesting, because besides making him look different ages, Jack's physical appearance is a shorthand to communicate the time period. Back before Jack met Rebecca, he was clean-shaven, and he looks like a baby-faced kid. While he and Rebecca are married, but before the kids are born, he has a full beard. When the kids are younger, he has just the mustache. And when the kids are teenagers, he has a goatee. The facial hair is really all that changes, and it's really amazing how just the one detail makes him feel so much younger or older. Rebecca is by far the hardest one to pull off, because we see her across the widest range of time. Across flashbacks, Rebecca changes gradually. As she gets older, her hairstyle shifts from black to brown to gray and gets shorter and shorter. In the present, they went all out to make her seem older. They cut her hair into a bob, gave her glasses, added wrinkles, and dressed her exclusively in old lady sweaters. But even with all that, they can't totally cover up how stunning Mandy Moore looks all the time. They lampshade this a little by saying how Rebecca has always been really beautiful and that she aged really gracefully. But you know what? It still works, because Mandy Moore sells it with her physical acting. Her movements as older Rebecca are really stiff, and she feels more frail than she does when she's younger. And really old, almost dead Rebecca looks appropriately ancient, even though we've only seen her for a few seconds. She looks like the guy at the end of 2001: A Space Odyssey. Alright, we're halfway through the show. Let's talk about Season 4. I like to call this one the villain season, for reasons that will soon become clear. But for now, let's recap the opening episode. The flashback sections pick up before Jack and Rebecca got married. Rebecca sets up a date for Jack to meet her parents. Jack goes to a clothing store to buy a suit for the date, where he meets Miguel for the first time. Jack can't afford the sport coat he wants, and Miguel lets him take it out for free to wear on the date and bring back. The tension is that Rebecca's family is rich, and Jack comes from a lower social status, so he's worried about being good enough for her. Rebecca's parents immediately make him uncomfortable by grilling him about his family in Vietnam, the stuff he always says he hates talking about. Jack panics when he accidentally gets cocktail sauce on the sport coat. He goes to the bathroom, cleans up, calms down, returns, and very frankly tells the table about his many life struggles. Like always, Jack charms everyone, but Rebecca's father catches a glimpse of the tag on his sport coat, which makes it look like he stole it. We've met Rebecca's mother before, and she's a real piece of work, but we don't know that much about her father. At the beginning of the dinner, Rebecca said that her mom is tough, but her dad is nice. That's not how things play out, though. Her dad is polite during the dinner, but after, he pulls Jack aside to tell him he doesn't approve of their relationship. The rest of the episode, interestingly, does not follow adult Kevin, Kate, or Randall. Instead, we meet three completely new characters. A soldier named Cass fights in Afghanistan and goes through all kinds of trauma. When she comes home, she's distant from her husband and son, and develops a drinking problem, which culminates in her hitting her son. A teenage boy named Malik has an infant daughter. He works in his father's mechanic shop, and his father is an ex-con. He's worried about providing for his daughter, so he tries to contact an old criminal buddy of his dad's to make some money, but the guy turns him down. An unnamed blind man goes to a diner and flirts with the waitress, Lucy. He's a musician trying to figure out his latest song. After talking to Lucy, though, he gets inspired to finish it. He and Lucy end up dating, getting engaged, and then Lucy gets pregnant. This is the show's classic trick, introducing some random people to get you wondering why they matter. It's only at the end of the episode when that question is answered. Cass goes to a veterans therapy group, and Nikki throws a chair through the window while drunk. Malik goes to a party and flirts with Deja. And the blind guy is Jack Damon, Kate and Toby's son, who was born blind but grew up to be a famous musician. Cool, but this brings up the question I've been asking for a while. Can the show keep coming up with things to do with the Pearsons without running out of character development? This would seem to indicate no, them introducing new point of view characters. But they're not really point of view characters. After this episode, Cass and Malik become just more background people in Kevin and Randall's stories. They get screen time, but they're never as important as they seem to be here. And we barely see Jack at all after this. We get the occasional really quick flash forward, but he mostly exists just to compare against Kate and Toby's parenting in the present. We'll see something Kate and Toby do for Jack, and then it flashes to adult Jack so we can see that it mattered and it helped him. But this season is business as usual. The Pearsons dealing with drama and trauma. The difference being, this is the villain season. Here's why. Things keep chugging along for Randall and Beth. They move to Philly, and they put their fight behind them. Randall starts his term as councilman, and the third episode has this storyline where, I don't know how to put it other than, the vibes are off. Randall makes the news by taking his office door off its hinges, as a symbolic gesture that everyone can come talk to him about problems in the city. That naturally leads to tons of people coming to see him every day. Randall being Randall, he doesn't back down and talks to every single one of them. But that leads to him missing a few important meetings with the other councilmen. He has this staff member named Bernice, who keeps telling him he's being naive, and that he has to put in his time schmoozing to get stuff done. It all comes to a head when Bernice tells him to fire Jaywan, because Jaywan won't tell him no, even though he supposedly knows better. Randall almost listens to her, but he stops himself and decides to fire her instead. Now, what do I mean the vibes are off? Well, it doesn't feel like the problem got solved, does it? It was good that Randall stood up for what he believes in, but Bernice had a point. Randall is naive, and he's ignoring important parts of his job. It doesn't feel like he learned the right lesson here.
Everybody's an idiot except for me.
And that's not just my personal opinion about what he should have done. In the scene itself, nobody's happy about what's happening. Bernice leaves with bad feelings, still thinking she was in the right. It's not the clean resolution to a conflict that you'd expect from a TV episode. Malik and Deja get to know each other more as the season goes on. But once Randall and Beth find out Malik has a kid, they shut it all down right away. Now, from the audience point of view, Malik is a pretty stand-up guy. Outside of his attempt to do some crimes, for noble reasons, he's been nothing but kind to Deja. And he made the really hard choice to take custody of his daughter when he could have given her out for adoption. He's taken full responsibility for his mistakes, and then some. So when Randall and Beth say he can't see Deja because of it, it just feels all kinds of wrong. Regardless of what Deja's parents say, Malik skips school with her to show her around Philadelphia. Even though both sets of parents are furious about it, Deja describes it as the best day of her life. Randall and Beth finally see that Malik might be good for Deja and let them date. But sheesh, took them long enough. This season is just Randall making bad call after bad call. Then there's one of the more significant storylines of the season. Randall is with Rebecca, and she has a mini freakout about forgetting where she put her phone, because she lost her last one. Based on this, Randall says to her that he thinks she's experiencing cognitive decline and that she should see a doctor. This was a weird episode to watch because, yeah, Rebecca is acting a little off throughout it, but when Randall comes in and says, "I know what's going on, you're getting old and losing your mind," it's like, how could you possibly know that? You got that from this?
Everybody's an idiot except for me.
That's what Miguel thinks, and he gets annoyed at Randall for overreacting. But Randall turns out to be right. Rebecca gets some testing done and finds out that she has mild cognitive decline caused by the early stages of Alzheimer's. Rebecca doesn't want Randall to tell anyone because she hasn't decided what this means yet and she doesn't want people to worry. Related to all this though, we get something extra juicy. In the Thanksgiving episode, Rebecca goes for a walk to clear her head. Because this is before she got tested and she's mad at Randall for raising the possibility that something's wrong with her. During the episode, she wanders from place to place, and every time she goes somewhere new, she forgets why she was there in the first place. She leaves her phone at the grocery store and has a meltdown in a restaurant when she realizes it's missing again. The cops end up having to take her home. But here's the twist. This isn't happening in the present. This is happening in the near future. The cops bring her back to the cabin for the kid's 40th birthday party, placing this a few months later, presumably around the next season premiere. Kevin and Kate are there, but Randall isn't, because apparently he and Kevin aren't on speaking terms. What could have happened to make them fight this bad? Not sure, but like I keep saying, things keep feeling off. Not just with Randall, but with everybody. In Kate's storyline, she and Toby are dealing with raising Jack after they find out he'll be blind. Around this time, we see a change in Toby. It's in a lot of ways that are hard to pin down, but mainly, he gets skinny. He starts going to the gym and he loses a bunch of weight. He tells Kate that he doesn't want to have another heart attack and leave Jack without a father. This whole thing sends Kate spiraling into all her most annoying tendencies. She resents Toby for getting healthy without her, and pretty openly wishes he was still fat. And it's like, oh my god, Kate, can you go one episode without making your insecurities everyone else's problem? But again, the The vibes are off. First of all, Toby kept his workouts a secret until Kate figured it out. Maybe he kept it a secret because he knew Kate was going to react in exactly this way, but how'd you think this was gonna go? You look completely different. And you have to know it's never a good idea to lie to your wife. And anyway, why did you suddenly decide now to start working out? It's a constant problem this season that Toby's not home with the baby a lot, but you have time for hours at the gym? And Kate goes through Toby's phone to find he's been venting about her to a girl at the gym. He says they're just friends, but then she tries to kiss him, so he switches gyms. All without telling Kate. It's generally Kate starting any arguments, and from our point of view, the conflicts feel like her fault, but something feels off. Toby is way less forgiving than he usually is, and anyway, why is he spending so much time away from home? Why does he keep not telling Kate about random things? Kate confronts Toby about all this, and he finally admits what's been going on. Ever since he found out Jack would be blind, he's felt sad and angry. While Kate has been all in on raising a blind baby with no regrets, Toby is feeling resentment toward his infant son because he's blind. Whew, that's hard to hear. Beyond that, it has the potential to destroy their marriage. See what I mean about this being the villain season? Toby has always been the perfect husband who never does anything wrong ever. Every fight they've ever had has been Kate's fault. But this time, even though a lot of it seems like Kate's starting it, Toby's finally the one who's all the way in the wrong. This is similar to how Randall's being characterized. Characters who, while flawed, have been paragons of goodness, are showing an uglier side to them, getting the audience to root against them. Speaking of characters who are always morally good and perfect all the time, what's Jack up to this season? Like the season opener indicated, a lot of the flashbacks are about the time where Jack and Rebecca first started dating. The long-running storyline for this part of the show is Jack trying to prove himself to Rebecca's dad. The main reason why Rebecca's dad doesn't want Jack dating his daughter is because he's poor. Or, well, he never says that outright. It's more like he assumes a lot of bad things about Jack because of his classist attitude. He first turns on Jack when he sees the tag still on his coat at the diner. He gives this whole speech about how, deep down, Jack is an angry man. Which, he's technically right. We know that. But what made him think that? I interpret this as the typical rich conservative attitude that the poors deserve to be poor because it's their own fault. They're too dumb or too uncultured or generally don't have what it takes to climb the social ladder. Even though Jack seems like a good guy, he must have darkness on the inside. Otherwise, he wouldn't be poor still. Rebecca's dad keeps pushing Jack's buttons and showing him how he doesn't fit in with the rich life Rebecca is used to. And it works. It gets to Jack and makes him decide to break up with Rebecca because he thinks he can't provide for her. But in a twist, Rebecca's mother actually talks to her and convinces her to fight for Jack if she really loves him. It all worked out in the end, obviously. Continuing with the theme of villain season, I don't mean to imply that anything Jack did here was evil or anything, but this and other moments from the season do show us a pretty serious lapse in judgment from him. I keep coming back to this idea of Jack as the perfect paragon that the show presents us, and that the present day characters remember him as. Previous seasons have shown Jack making mistakes, but it was almost always tied to alcohol. His fight with Rebecca, driving drunk, him breaking the plate because withdrawal was getting to him. Jack's been this perfect guy who on occasion lets alcohol change him. This storyline and this season casts doubt on that. The mistakes he makes aren't huge, but they're enough to show cracks in the perfection. Like when the family goes to New York City, and Jack keeps insisting he knows where to go and getting them lost, ignoring Rebecca's directions even though she obviously knows more than him, because he wants to prove he's worldly enough for her. It's her dad's words coming back to haunt him years later. Or, this moment that really made my skin crawl, when toddler Randall can't sleep because of monsters under the bed. Jack tries for a while to get him to go back to bed, and when he can't, he tells him that, "You've always been the good kid, and you make things easier when you don't cause trouble."
Your brother and your sister are kind of high maintenance, so I need you to just keep being you. So can you be a good boy and sleep in your bed tonight?
So Randall goes to bed, internalizing the message that he shouldn't show weakness or be disruptive ever, and that he has to bury his fears deep down. These moments make you question Jack as a parent and as a person. You think back to other moments, like the one I already alluded to when he got into that fist fight, or when he disowned Nikki. Did he really need to give up on him? And let's not forget that when he met Rebecca, he was in the middle of a robbery. He can and does make mistakes that you can't blame on the alcohol. Not to say we should be letting him off the hook for stuff he did because of alcohol either. Under the perfect veneer, he was always a flawed character, and this season finally lets him feel like a flawed character. Even though we're not seeing Jack at his best here, these moments and storylines speak to his strength as a parent. All parents are flawed people, but despite that, they all do their best to present their best selves to their kids to make them feel safe and loved, and also give them a positive example. I think back to the sequin fight from last season. Present-day Kate only remembered the happy moments because Jack has always been able to recover from his mistakes and project the idea of a strong, loving father. Jack's not a perfect person, but he really might have been the perfect dad. Other flashbacks show the Pearson kids as they hit puberty, and keep up with what they're doing after Jack died. Both the kid and teen actors are getting older, so it's interesting to see how the writers handle that. There's an episode that serves as a sequel to the pool episode from season 1, that cuts between the two to show how the kids have grown up in that time. With the kid actors and characters hitting puberty, they're starting to bump up against the teen actors in the timeline. Same with the teen actors and adult actors, although the gap is bigger. It could be distracting, but I think they did a really good job casting these kids, so it never feels weird. 18-year-old Kevin is off in New York trying to act, and he gets married to Sophie. Randall is now dating Beth in college, trying to manage his anxiety. He didn't go to Howard. He went to a local college to be close to home. The thing we see the most with Randall here is that he's assigned himself the role of Rebecca's caretaker. He comes home from college constantly to check on her, and make sure the house is okay, and be her emotional support, while burying any anxiety he himself is feeling. But the most interesting thing that happens in this part of the season is Kate's boyfriend, Mark, whom I will henceforth refer to as Greasy Boyfriend. Because, look at him. Everything about him is slimy and gross. By design. You're meant to hate him. So Kate first meets Greasy Boyfriend at the local record store where he works, and after they flirt for a while, he gets her a job there. Everyone else in the family hates Greasy Boyfriend. He doesn't do anything wrong, really, except that he's a few years older. He just puts out a vibe that's, greasy. That's what this season is doing. It's amazingly good at using subtle clues to tell you who you should or shouldn't root for, even if their actions are pretty neutral. Not long after we meet him, we see adult Kate find a picture of him, and her conversation with Rebecca indicates that he did something horrible to her. Hearing that, my thoughts immediately went to a certain thing that's hard to talk about on YouTube. But of course, the answer isn't going to be the first thing you think of. That's not how these kinds of mysteries work. What actually happened is more complicated. The Greasy Boyfriend storyline leads into the big turning point of the season, Hell of a Week. It's another one of those sets of 3 episodes that happen concurrently, with each one from a different sibling's point of view. It starts with adult Randall coming home late at night and running into a burglar breaking into his house. That, combined with Rebecca's diagnosis, sends his anxiety through the roof during the next week. He comes real close to having another breakdown. Kate goes to a retreat for blind kids, and she's still mad at Toby for what he said, so she takes Rebecca with her. They have a heart-to-heart where Kate vents about Toby, and Rebecca reveals her diagnosis. She gets home, and the conflict with Toby comes to a head, where she tells him that he needs to be a good dad, or their marriage is over. And Kevin, well, I'll get to him. In the flashbacks, Greasy Boyfriend reveals just how greasy he is. And not just greasy, full-on abusive. It starts with him picking a fight with Kate just because she corrected him in front of a customer. Of course, he apologizes and love bombs her right after. He ends up quitting his job and asks Rebecca if he and Kate can take a trip up to the family cabin to write songs. And the whole time, he's putting off extra greasy vibes.
Sorry, I'm late. My car's a piece of crap. Hello? Hey.
Just, threw up in my mouth a little bit.
Rebecca says no, but Kate yells at her and goes anyway. The implication is that she's so devastated from losing her dad that she's falling all over the first take-charge guy who shows her any attention, missing all the red flags. On the drive there, Kate tells Greasy Boyfriend that she won't quit her job like he did, and that leads to him screaming at her and driving way too fast, ending with him kicking her out of the car to walk on the side of the highway. Kate finds a payphone to call home for help, but as she's about to tell Rebecca what happened, Greasy Boyfriend drives back up and apologizes. They head up to the cabin, but of course, Rebecca picks up that there's something wrong and gets the whole family to drive up to help her. Kate gets to the cabin, and Greasy Boyfriend keeps acting terrible. He breaks a mug with Jack's face on it when Kate tells him not to use it. Throughout this whole time, he keeps calling Kate fat every time he's mad. When Rebecca and the family finally get there the next morning, they find that Greasy Boyfriend locked Kate out in the snow, and she cut herself breaking a window trying to get inside before she froze. Finally, they kick Greasy Boyfriend out, and Kate breaks down crying. Now, as I've said, the main purpose of the flashbacks has been to show events in the 3 Pearsons' past, to explain why they are the way they are now. This series of events shows how vulnerable Kate was after losing Jack, and it also explains more about how it's been hard for her to trust Toby. Jack was her knight in shining armor, and she became jaded that other men in her life didn't live up to him. Also, this season, more than any other, the teens become strong characters in their own right, who stand apart from their adult versions. Hannah Zale plays teen Kate with all this rage and hatred simmering just below the surface all the time. She might have been my favorite character this season. Okay, it's finally time to talk about Kevin. So, why did I go out of my way to hold off talking about him until now? Well, my thesis for this part of the video is that this is the villain season. Previously untouchably perfect characters are shown to have serious moral flaws. Characters you usually root for make iffy decisions. What does that mean for Kevin, the most morally gray character? The exact opposite. This season, Kevin is a saint. We left off with Kevin having broken up with Zoe because he wants to have kids. So that's his life goal from then on. He wants to have kids as soon as possible. Of course, that means he needs to find a woman to settle down with first. By the way, I want to show you the poster for this season because it's so unintentionally hilarious. You've got all the main characters with their partners looking so happy, and then there's Kevin all by himself like, yeah, I'm not lonely. But his story doesn't jump right into that. Instead, it's Nikki driving most of his storyline. After Nikki breaks that window and gets arrested, he calls Kevin to bail him out. Kevin decides to go the extra mile, pun intended, and fly across the country to stay with Nikki, even though Nikki doesn't want him to. See how already Kevin is doing lots more good stuff than usual? Nikki keeps telling Kevin to go home, but Kevin won't take no for an answer, because his uncle needs help and he's gonna give it. Things escalate, and he ends up buying his own trailer to park next to Nikki's to live next to him instead of going back to Hollywood. Wait, hold on. This is another BoJack Horseman plotline. In the past, I've been mostly kidding around comparing these two, because they're both about the dark side of being a famous actor, so of course they'll have similarities, but this is weirdly specific. While he's there, Kevin gets to know Cass. You didn't forget who she was, did you? It's been like 8 pages of script since I mentioned her. She's going to VA meetings to get her alcoholism and trauma under control. They actually meet because Kevin makes friends with her son, Maddie. Many jokes are made about how weird it is that Kevin likes hanging around a little boy so much. But this is more proof of how much Kevin needs to be a dad. Cass is on the verge of a divorce with her husband after everything she did, so Kevin makes it his mission to get them back together. But it doesn't work, and they end up sleeping together instead. Cool. Very healthy. I have to ask the question of why Kevin is acting like Mr. Fix-It this season. He keeps trying to help people with their problems, going way above and beyond to do so. In short, I think he's inspired by Jack. He spent so much time shutting out all thoughts of Jack, but after everything he did last season, he's finally letting that influence come through. He helps Cass as a sort of temporary surrogate husband to her and surrogate father to Maddie. And he helps Nikki, because Nikki is a living connection to Jack. And by helping him, Kevin can give back to his dad in a way. He's also working to repair one of Jack's biggest mistakes, giving up on Nikki too soon. But we can't ignore the idea that Kevin is also looking for Nikki to be a Jack substitute to replace the dad he lost. There's the whole scene where Nikki chews out Kevin for sleeping with Cass, and Kevin literally sees Jack in his place. It's clear that Kevin spends this season with the constant thought of, what would Jack do? That allows him to keep doing good even when his resolve is tested. He even avoids drinking. He goes to a bar after Nikki yells at him, but all he does is drink club soda. And let a guy punch him in the face, so, progress. Intentions aside, Kevin is doing a lot of good. Sleeping with Cass could be seen as morally dubious, but at this point her marriage was beyond saving, and everything works out in the end. Kevin and Cass stay friends, and Cass accepts divorce as the best possible option at this point. Despite Nikki's constant complaining that Kevin won't leave him alone, he slowly warms up to him over time. And at his hearing, he talks about how grateful he was to have Kevin help him after being alone all this time. This whole story arc wraps up pretty cleanly about halfway through the season. Kevin goes back home and decides to really buckle down and find a woman to be a mom to his kids. There's a really awkward episode where he romances a stranger only to find out that she's married and got a hall pass from her husband to hook up with him because he's her celebrity crush. That brings us to Kevin's hell of a week storyline. The first episode of the group is Randall's, and we get a brief glimpse at what's happening to Kevin through a few phone calls. Kevin tells Randall he's going to a funeral for Sophie's mom, and later, Kevin calls again from in bed with a woman. Obviously you're meant to think, oh, is that Sophie? But of course, what do I always say? If it's your first thought, it's not the right answer. Kevin goes to the funeral and catches up with Sophie. They have a good time together as Kevin takes his mind off her grief. She's engaged to a new guy though, so romance is off the table, even if Kevin hadn't blown it with her twice already. In the flashbacks, Kevin asks Sophie's mom for her family ring, and she turns him down because he hasn't proven he's worthy of it yet. Kevin thinks back on all that, and how now he's worthy, but it's too late. Everything with Kevin and Sophie is very bittersweet. So much attention is given to their failed relationship, with scene after scene hammering in how they had the perfect love story, even seasons after they broke up for good. You'd think they'd be an obvious endgame couple, and in a less capable show, they would be. But there's enough uncertainty around it that it's hard to say if it'll ever happen. It all comes back to Jack again. Kevin wants to have that perfect love story like his parents did, which is part of why he keeps carrying a torch for Sophie. But it's not going to work out because he can't live up to that perfect image of his dad in his head. But wait, if it's not Sophie, then who is that in bed with him? Well, Kevin goes to visit Kate, but Kate's on that blind baby retreat, and he finds Madison there dog-sitting.
Her friend, Madison? You know, the blonde one? Talks a lot.
I know who Madison is, Beth. She's literally the only friend in our entire family.
She just had a bad breakup, and the two get to talking, and then they do a little more than talking. Yep, she's the one in the bed there. After all the stress from hell of a week, the Pearson siblings decide to take a trip up to the cabin to recuperate. Toby tells Kate he wants to step up and watch Jack while she's away to try and bond with him and get over his emotional block. They all get to the cabin, and at this point, Kevin is the only one of the three who doesn't know about Rebecca's diagnosis. Randall lets it slip, and Kevin is really upset nobody told him, especially because the reason is that Rebecca didn't want to worry him. The rest of the family treats him like he's a hopeless screw-up who can't handle anything, but this season he's proved that wrong. That builds to the big final conflict of the season. After Kevin learns about all this, he starts spending a ton of time with Rebecca. They bond a lot, unlike most of their lives previously. Rebecca has embraced a philosophy of living in the moment and enjoying the time she has left. But Randall comes up with a plan to get Rebecca into a fancy clinical trial to slow her Alzheimer's. In St. Louis. For 9 months. This is the exact opposite of Rebecca's whole carpe diem philosophy. She just moved to LA to be near Jack and the rest of the family. Kevin's been with her for all of this, and he knows that Randall's trial idea isn't what she wants. So things get tense between Kevin and Randall pretty quickly. Of course, it's Rebecca's decision in the end, and she turns it down for all the reasons I already mentioned. Randall blames this on Kevin not supporting him, and it's the maddest we've ever seen him. Instead of accepting it, Randall calls Rebecca and tells her that she needs to agree to do the trial, as a sort of penance for hiding William from him.
I have been a good son, and I've let things go, Mom. Things that were kept from me. I've been a good son, Mom. I've been a good son, and I've never asked you for anything, but I am asking you for this now.
Randall is 100% in the wrong here. This clinical trial is a great thing in theory, but Rebecca doesn't want it, and Randall is trying to steamroll past her wishes because he can't handle losing her. This is his true villain moment, where he goes from to Even Beth's not on his side. Beth pushed Randall to see a therapist after all the stress he'd been under this season. And always. He started opening up about how he's feeling and where his anxieties come from. The show does this neat little thing where we don't see the therapist's face for the whole first session because Randall is closed off to the idea of therapy, until he finally comes around to it, and the shot flips around. But the second to last episode of the season shows Randall and his therapist brainstorming scenarios of how his life would be different if Jack hadn't died in the fire. It's revealed just how much Randall blames himself for letting Jack run back into the house.
Dad, if you go back in that house, so help me God, I'll go through that front door and get you myself.
Jack?
The first scenario is an idyllic fantasy where everything is more or less the same except Jack is still alive, and Rebecca decides to admit that she knows about William. So Randall gets to have both his dads for as long as possible. The therapist points out how unrealistic this is, so Randall creates a different scenario where Rebecca tells him about William, but William rejects him because he's still on drugs. And the resentment Randall has for his mother builds so much that he eventually cuts ties with his family and struggles to form bonds with anybody. I have to say that these characters in this world are all so well developed that even in the idealized version, everything still feels believable and three-dimensional. But this conversation reveals a few things about Randall's psyche. He has a pathological need to control everything. He'll move heaven and earth to make things go the way he wants them to, and when he can't, it kills him, drives him to anxiety attacks. He couldn't save Jack, and he couldn't save William, and this eats him up inside, so he needs to save Rebecca. It also reveals that he still resents Rebecca for keeping William from him, something that I mostly forgot about by now, but he's still carrying it around. The therapist does all she can to push Randall to forgive her and let go, but Randall doesn't quite internalize that lesson. That leads us to the series finale, and the last big confrontation between Kevin and Randall. Real quick, to wrap up Kate's storyline, long story short, it's a happy ending. Toby bonds with Jack during their weekend alone, he shows him Star Wars sounds, he apologizes to Kate, and he says he's ready to be a good dad. Okay, Kevin and Randall. When Rebecca announces out of nowhere that she's changed her mind about the trial, Kevin figures out that Randall pushed her into it. This escalates to the biggest fight they've ever had, and that includes the multiple times when they literally threw punches in public. This isn't just a fight, it's the fight. The fight about everything they felt about each other for their whole lives. Kevin thinks Randall is a self-righteous pain who thinks of himself as the only capable person in the world. Their whole adult lives, Randall has made himself the head of the family, making all the decisions. Something we've seen has been happening since Jack died. He's trying to act like Jack's replacement. He doesn't trust that anyone else could possibly know more about how to help Rebecca, and he won't let anyone else try. And Kevin is still holding on to anger that Randall was at the fire and didn't do anything to save Jack. Randall sees Kevin as the flake who always runs away when the going gets tough. When Jack died, he ran away to become an actor. He kept the family at a distance for his entire life. He hurt people with his alcoholism and general selfish tendencies. He was the golden child who had everything handed to him and still managed to screw most of it up, while Randall had to work for everything. Just because he's been spending more time with Rebecca recently doesn't give him precedence over the years of Randall acting like Rebecca's caretaker. And Randall might not have saved Jack, but Kevin wasn't even there. He never is there. And of course, the fight is so emotionally fraught because both of them are giving voice to the other's biggest insecurities. This fight is the reason why they weren't on speaking terms in the flash forward. The conversation ends with Kevin saying this.
You know, I used to think the worst thing that happened to me was the day that Dad died. It's the day they brought you home. Hand to God, Randall, the worst thing that ever happened to me was the day they brought you home.
Yeah, I know I said Kevin is a saint. Maybe I should reconsider that particular word choice. But still, Randall is definitely the one who's wrong. The narrative definitively frames him as in the wrong. The season ends on a big downer note because of him. Kevin said some harsh things in that argument. But to be fair, he had a reason to be off his game. Madison had just told him that she's pregnant from their one-night stand. It's a lot to take in, but Kevin's all in, ready to be a father. After all this time, he's finally going to be a dad. Just not in the way he expected. In flash forwards, we see Kevin's kids. Kids plural, because Madison is having twins. It does run in the family. The last thing from the season finale is more flash forwards to Jack. His partner Lucy is giving birth. And we get scenes with a woman named Haley, an art curator who gets a sudden call and rushes out of work. It turns out that she's rushing to get to the hospital where Lucy is giving birth, because she's Jack's sister. In the present, Toby and Kate decide they want to adopt another kid. So we have that to look forward to next season. And that's season 4. As I keep emphasizing, lots of characters acting kinda terrible. It's nothing any of them can't bounce back from. Characters like Toby fully redeem themselves by the end, but Randall is still in the middle of making his mistakes, and there's something he'll have to reckon with next season. But overall, this was Kevin's season. We've watched him screw up over and over until now, where he displayed an unprecedented level of character growth. For once, he manages to consistently make the right choice, even more so than his supposedly perfect brother. The jury's still out as to whether he'll stay that good, so we'll see. This season gave us a lot to think about, in terms of character, but also in terms of mystery. We get more of this flash-forward scene at Kevin's house at Rebecca's deathbed, but not that much. It's only little flashes about things that pertain to the present, like Kevin's kids and Jack's kids. And oh yeah, I didn't mention that Kevin finds these blueprints Jack made for a house that he put inside a time capsule. And that's this house that he eventually had built and is living on. But the lack of detailed information leads me to believe that the writers are hiding something about this scene. I'm expecting some kind of reveal about it in the future. We also have lots more questions about the immediate future. Are Kevin and Randall going to make up? How's Rebecca's health going to progress? What about Kevin and Kate's future kids? This is much more of a cliffhanger than usual. And we're getting to the point in the show where I'm thinking more about the ending. How is the show going to end? How do you wrap up a story like this? All the character conflict comes from a lifetime of trauma and grief, and from innate personality traits. Early on, I was worried that the story wouldn't have enough drama to keep it going. Now I feel like the story could basically go on forever if it wanted to. I wonder how or if there's going to be a satisfying resolution. Season 5, I went in a little wary. I'd heard things about this season. This was the season that was made during COVID, and that allegedly there was a sharp decline in quality for a while. I'm nervous because Season 4 left a lot of really important stuff up in the air that this season needs to flesh out. And this show has been so consistently brilliant so far, and I'd hate to see outside circumstances ruin that. But I don't know. Fingers crossed. Let's see how it goes. So, what happens during the premiere? This is the show's first official 2-part episode. The Pearsons' 40th birthday approaches, when the coronavirus and quarantine shut everything down. Rebecca's clinical trial is cancelled, which means all the fighting Randall and Kevin did was for nothing. Randall still isn't talking to Kevin, or really anyone else in the family. Rebecca and Miguel were at the cabin when the lockdown hit, so the family decides to arrange for a birthday party there, taking the proper COVID precautions, of course. Everyone but Randall goes there. Kate and Toby are waiting for a call from the adoption agency, and Kevin and Madison are getting ready for their kids to be born. There's a whole big crisis where Madison falls on her stomach and they drive to the nearest hospital in a panic to make sure they're okay. The whole experience makes Kevin decide that he really wants to be there for Madison and the kids, so he proposes to her. So yeah, they're engaged now. This is also when Rebecca has her medical episode that we saw in the flash forward. It happens just like we saw last season, with the added wrinkle that COVID is happening around it. They show it as little as possible here, because we've already seen it, and because they probably didn't want us asking too many questions. Like, wait, so she went to a supermarket where the cashier wasn't wearing a mask? And then she went to a restaurant? Honestly, they got real lucky. They could have really screwed themselves over flashing forward to 2020. The whole family is in a panic trying to find her, and Randall drives up when he finds out what's going on. Randall figures out that this was all a side effect of her brain medicine interacting with her allergy medicine. This brings back the old argument that Randall always acts like he knows what's best, and this, annoyingly, seems to prove him right. The episode wraps up with an awkward non-reunion with the family before Randall leaves again. So, while everyone else was at the cabin, what was Randall doing? In short, thinking about George Floyd. They're going all in on all current events, not just the pandemic. Randall spends a lot of time feeling conflicted and distant from his loved ones because all the protests dug up old feelings of loneliness being black and raised by a white family. He talks to Malik about watching the killing of Johnny Gamage as a kid, and how isolating it was that none of his family seemed to notice or care that it happened. When he goes to the cabin, Kate asks him why he's been so distant from everyone. Kevin is one thing, since they had a big fight, but Randall is almost entirely cut off her and Rebecca, his whole adoptive family. He explains that he's been feeling some resentment that the family never did enough to... actually, I don't want to put words in his mouth because this is a complicated and sensitive topic, so let's just play the clips of what he said to her.
We grew up in the same house. Things like this have been happening to black people for years, and we've never talked about it. So, growing up, I just had to keep so many things to myself because I didn't want to make you guys feel bad. I didn't want you to have to worry about saying the wrong thing. And normally I would hug you, and I would tell you that you did all the right things. I would try to make it all okay for you. But if I did that, Kate, if I made things better for you, then where does that leave me?
This pair of episodes is the lowest rated, most hated part of the whole series. Can you guess why? Alright, let's go through the list of reasons why these episodes were controversial and whether or not I think the hate is justified. First, the writing of the pandemic into the story. This is the same catch-22 that a lot of shows were in at the time. People really didn't like seeing these characters talk about quarantines and wearing masks because they were using TV to escape from that in the real world. I guess I understand that emotion, but I also think the show didn't really have a choice. The story has always followed a very strict timeline and makes constant reference to real events past and present. It would have felt dishonest to pretend COVID didn't exist. It didn't affect my enjoyment of the show at all. Maybe because we're a few years out from lockdown at this point, and also the show minimized pandemic stuff as much as possible. It's there in the background, but they avoid bringing it up most of the time. The other big thing people hated was this whole Randall thing. Look, I'm not black. Don't know if you could tell. So this is tricky for me to try and analyze. I'm gonna take it as a given that Randall's feelings are valid and that he has a right to express them. I'm not interested in, or capable of, judging the scene politically or morally. That said, let me explain why I think this scene fails narratively.
And this isn't the first black person to be killed on camera.
I don't know, this feels different.
Not for me, Kate.
Police brutality has never come up in the show before this, and it doesn't come up again after this either. Bringing in the 2020 protests muddied the message of this conversation. Randall has so much that he needs to confront his family about in regards to race, as we see throughout the rest of the season. I think this season tackles the tension he's felt being raised by a white family better than anything that came before. And, getting ahead of myself here, Randall pretty much has this exact conversation with Kevin at the end of the season, and it's excellent.
I'm so sorry.
Specifically, what are you apologizing for?
And I am genuinely sorry, Randall.
And you clearly don't even understand what it is you're apologizing for.
Because by that point, we've watched Randall navigate his thoughts on the subject all season, and the conversation comes as catharsis. That's been the show's MO with any conflict between family members. It shows one character silently stewing over something that's bothering them, with flashbacks to the event that caused them to feel that way, so that we really understand why they feel that way when they finally confront the other family member about it. But in this episode, it all kinda comes out of nowhere. Also, what was the thing that prompted this conversation? Kate asked Randall why he'd been ignoring her and acting cold to her. We're still not done with Randall's villain arc, where his arrogance and sense of superiority fractured the family. The audience is still mad at him for that. He hasn't even apologized for it. and the show wants us to take his side now, when he's deciding to further separate himself from his family again? It all comes down to a timing issue. The show wasn't ready to have this conversation at this moment. It really feels like this real-world event made the writers feel obligated to include this conversation before they were ready to have it. It didn't have the proper build-up. There were always going to be people who got mad about this because they don't want their favorite show to get political. Those people are, of course, stupid, who weren't paying attention to how overtly political the rest of the show has been. But still, this scene didn't work. That said, it's astounding how many people online describe this as Randall yelling at Kate and accusing her. She asked him how he was feeling, and he calmly stated his feelings. He's not in the wrong in this scene. As a fictional character, though, he wasn't positioned correctly in the narrative to get the audience on his side. There is a third reason why these episodes are criticized. For that, I need to recap the main flashbacks. They focus around William and Randall's mother, Laurel, as she gives birth. She had stopped doing drugs to make sure her baby was healthy, but she gave birth in their apartment, without doctors, and she's in so much pain that she begs William to get her some drugs to make it stop. He does, and the drugs stop her heart. The paramedics declare her dead, and William runs out with the baby to avoid talking to the authorities. This is why he gave Randall up for adoption. But here's the twist. After William ran away, this happened. I'll admit, when I saw this, I rolled my eyes. Haven't they done this before? Dead family member who wasn't really dead? In a vacuum, there's nothing wrong with it. But this happening so late in the show could be indicative of the show running out of gas. There are only so many big twists you can have in the flashbacks before they start to feel forced, like the writers made it up after the fact. At the same time, though, Randall's biomom was something that's been conspicuously unexplored. My gut says this was always the plan, and the writers were holding on to her to make sure they had something to work with in these later seasons. So, there are reasons to dislike the season opener, some of which I agree with, most of which I don't. As we dive into the rest of the season, that's what I'll be focusing on. Is this season worse than what came before? Did the pandemic mess with their plans at all, or ruin the payoff to any mysteries? And is the show finally running out of stuff to do? Let's talk about Kevin's storyline, and how he tries to start his family with Madison. I know that arguably the point of Kevin's story is that he won't get the fairy tale romance that his dad got. But even knowing that, I found myself thinking on multiple occasions, Madison? Really? She hasn't come up much, but she's always been around as Kate's best friend, mostly there to give us some levity. I was open to being convinced that this couple could work, but as the season went on, I felt a growing sense that these two characters don't have a lot of chemistry. Also, Madison is a comic relief character. Bumping her up to a more serious regular role like this, where she needs the emotional depth to carry scenes, doesn't really work.
My eating disorder. But even now, sometimes my daily state of mind is still determined by my weight. Also, I am obsessed with the show Outlander. I've gone to conventions.
The main conflict here is whether Kevin is really truly prepared to be a good husband and father. Even though he keeps saying it's what he wants, does he really? And is this the way he wants to get it? He and Madison have an argument early on where Kevin takes a movie role in Vancouver, and whether Kevin can be a good dad if his acting career makes him travel all the time. Kevin goes to Vancouver as basically his one last job before he stays mostly in California for the kids. But while he's there, Madison goes into labor early. Choosing between finishing filming and being there for the birth of his kids, it's no contest. He walks off the set and rushes to LA as fast as he can. A comedy of errors makes the trip come down to the wire, where he loses his ID and has to beg the TSA to let him on his plane. It cuts away for a while so you don't know if he got through or not, but then he shows up at the hospital for Madison at exactly the right time. I like this plotline, but there's one teeny tiny part of it that bugs me. So the director of Kevin's movie is a guy named Foster, who's kind of a stuck-up jerk. They butt heads a bunch of times early in the season. When Kevin tells him he has to leave because Madison went into labor, Foster doesn't want him to leave for obvious reasons, but if you watch him, he's visibly moved by what Kevin is saying. He understands why he has to go.
I think I should go to her.
It's a moment of connection and humanity between them after all the hostility. But then in the car, Foster calls Kevin and asks him to come back. So naturally, Kevin screams at him and quits the movie.
I know you're really emotional right now, but I do need you to turn around and come back to set
Now
immediately.
shut up. You know what? Shut up. Just shut your mouth, stop talking. No one cares about your stupid movie.
What's the deal here? Why did Foster do a flip-flop? It's so frustrating. And we never get any resolution on this. We see Foster in one more scene later in the season when he and Kevin watch the finished movie, and that's it. no explanation was ever given as to what Foster was thinking or feeling. Why bother including this exchange at all? Here's my crackpot conspiracy theory. Listen to Foster's voice on this phone call. He doesn't sound angry or demanding. He sounds nervous, if anything.
I know you're really emotional right now, but I do need you to turn around and come back to set
Now
immediately.
shut up.
And it sounded like he had more to say before Kevin interrupted him and hung up. I think the original plan for this plotline was for Foster to help Kevin get to LA. I think the rest of that sentence was, "You need to come back because we found you a private jet," or something like that. And it would take Kevin until the last minute to realize. But something went wrong with the shoot because of COVID and the show couldn't film the scenes they wanted, so they had to work around it. Because it's also super weird that we don't see Kevin resolve the issue at the airport. Sure, they wanted to make it a surprise, but collectively, all this feels off. Anyway, all that aside, Kevin makes it there for the birth of his twins, Nick and Francis. Nick being named after Uncle Nicky. You know, if last season was the villain season, this one is the baby season. Because while all this is happening, Kate and Toby are working on adopting their second kid. Their journeys parallel each other. They get in contact with the birth mom, Ellie, and things go well. But things take a turn when the process brings up old memories for Kate. And she confesses to Toby that when she was a teenager, greasy boyfriend got her pregnant. And she got something I can't say on YouTube. Now I'm regretting the nickname Greasy Boyfriend because of how serious this got all of a sudden. But at this point I'm committed to the bit. Thankfully, all this has a happy ending. Kate ends up tracking Greasy Boyfriend down. He still sucks just as bad, living a pretty depressing life working a dead-end job. Kate doesn't tell him he got her pregnant, but she does finally tell him off for abusing her. It's especially satisfying because Kate's life is going so well. She's expecting her second kid, she gets a job as a music teacher for the blind that she loves. Toby does get laid off, which is rough, but it's nothing he can't bounce back from. She's fully recovered from Greasy Boyfriend in every way that matters. Ellie gives birth to baby Haley on the same day as Kevin's kids, and they take her home. Earlier, I alluded to the fact that the pandemic doesn't play much of a factor in the plot. The general vibe I get is that it was something the writers felt obligated to include, but didn't have any interest in exploring. That continues pretty consistently for the whole season. The pandemic never has any meaningful effect on the plot. What'll happen is that characters will arrive at a new location, take off their mask, pay lip service to the fact that they quarantined and tested before they got there, and things continue as normal. The show really tries its hardest to make you forget that the pandemic is happening at all. With one exception. Right in the middle of the season, there's the episode where Kate and Kevin's babies are born. And for once, the pandemic does come into play. Toby has to wait in the parking lot while Ellie gives birth, and Rebecca has to sit around in the cabin angry that she's forced to miss all this. During all this, there's a flashback plotline to some random people meeting and falling in love. By this point in the show, you know how things work. These strangers are going to be related to the Pearson story somehow. But that's not exactly what happens. The two people get married, and then get into some fights because the husband spends all his time at work. The wife asks him what's so important about his job, and he sits down to explain that he's developing the early internet. As a specific example of what great things the internet could be used for, he describes a video call. Cut to Rebecca and Toby meeting the babies on a video call, and Randall and Beth virtually comforting Madison before Kevin gets there. These two people were real, and this guy really did help build the internet. And this episode is an elaborate tribute to the people who made video chatting possible during the pandemic. Is this a little out of place? Yeah. Is it heartwarming? Sure. Did I like it? Honestly, I don't know. Maybe. I've been talking about the show for at least 2 hours now, and my brain is starting to turn into mush. Anyway, here's what Randall's been up to. We knew at this point that his birth mom Laurel didn't die. Randall finally finds out about this when a video of him as city councilman goes viral.
Try to imagine him in his underwear. Oh no, he's hot!
Leading a man named Hai Lang to reach out and say that he knew his mother. Randall and Beth travel to New Orleans to meet him and hear her story. She grew up rich, but left home because she found that lifestyle stifling. We know the part of the story where she met William, gave birth, and almost died. She got arrested for drug use and had no way to contact William or find her baby. So she went back home and built a life there. Hai Lang was somebody she dated when she was younger, and that she reconnected with in the final years of her life before she died of cancer. I really enjoyed this whole flashback episode. Laurel was an interesting character, and she had a lot in common with Randall. Her drive, her determination, her intelligence, and knowing the story affects Randall a lot more than he or I was expecting. Side note, the episode ends with Randall talking to Laurel's spirit. The show has done stuff like this before, and I assumed that they were non-diegetic and not meant to be taken literally. But then later Randall describes this happening, so I don't know what to think.
Yesterday, I was in New Orleans communing with the spirit of my birth mom.
All this builds to Randall's emotional journey of the season, grappling with his adoption status. I know what you're probably thinking. Again? I complained in the earlier seasons that every story about Kate was about her weight, and every story about Randall was about how he was adopted and black. Later seasons did eventually move away from those and let Kate and Randall explore different subjects. This might seem like a regression, the show spinning its wheels some more, but I didn't think it felt that way. The thesis of the first few seasons was that growing up in a white family left Randall with something missing inside. He could have the best and most perfect parents in the entire world, and he kinda did, but he would still feel longing for parents who looked like him. Season 5 is different. It explores the idea that Randall's adoptive family wasn't perfect. They've always been shown as good and blameless people who did everything they could for Randall, but now we're shown the ways that they actively failed Randall and made his life worse. There are moments where they just plain aren't there for him and don't notice he's struggling. The time he watched the Johnny Gamage killing. The time a friend of Kate's tried to kiss him because she wanted to see what it was like to kiss a black boy. The fact that he had imaginary black parents and felt like he had to keep it a secret. All this is especially true with Kevin. The reason why he and Randall fight all the time has been a little vague. But finally, as they get together to hash out their disagreements from last season, Randall gets into it with him. He tries his best to explain to Kevin how, even if Kevin didn't know it, he resented that Randall was black sometimes. Kevin's always had a bit of an inferiority complex, and he always says that Randall has nothing to complain about, that he's the golden child of the family. There was more than likely a small part of his brain that's been saying to him, ugh, why is my black brother valued more than me, the biological white kid? Causing him to lash out in a variety of ways. This is a really subtle thing that's hard for Kevin to understand, but it's also hard for the audience to understand, as we saw earlier. So crucially, the show sprinkled in lots of examples in this episode and in the ones that came before. One of the more striking moments to me is when young Kevin and Randall go to a taping of Mr. Rogers, and Kevin complains that Randall has a better seat, even though they're exactly the same.
Actually, no, these two are mine, right here.
Oh my God, I'm so sorry.
Since you're special,
Oh.
I'm gonna get you a special seat, huh?
What? What's wrong, bud?
Can't see.
You can see just fine. Here, just turn around.
I want Randall's seat.
It takes a while, and sparks fly, but Kevin eventually comes around to what Randall is saying, and gives a sincere apology. It explored the complexity of this conflict really well in 40 minutes and beyond, as opposed to cramming it into 3 minutes earlier. That idea, that the Pearsons weren't as perfect as we've been led to believe, that brings us to this season's portrayal of Jack. For the whole show, we've been teased by the idea that Jack wasn't the saint he's been made out to be. This season, more than ever, finally delivers on that promise. In the flashbacks, Jack is a real moron sometimes, screwing up constantly. Here's a list of some of his dumbest decisions this season. He went out to a business dinner and paid for everyone with money he didn't have because he felt insecure about being poor. He let Kevin overhear him saying he's soft and made him feel like his worth was defined by his football skills. He drank a bottle of whiskey while driving their newborns home from the hospital and almost got into a fistfight with a reckless driver. And he fought with Rebecca because he taped over her favorite show and then said it didn't matter because the show was stupid anyway. A moment that sticks out to me is the flashback where Nikki wants to ask out the girl he likes, Sally. Jack gasses him up about it, but then when she asked Nikki out, Nikki is so nervous that he says no at first. Jack hears this and walks in to resolve the situation and get him to say yes. But then, Sally tells Jack to basically mind his own business and let her handle it.
There was no better person to do that with than my brother Nick. I mean, this guy, he knows...
Jack, I'm perfectly capable of asking your brother out all on my own.
In any other season, this would have been another time where perfect Superman Jack swooped in to save the day. He didn't do anything really wrong here, but it shows that he's not flawless. The world can and did get along fine without him. Jack is ultimately still a great guy, but we get to see him not just make mistakes, but also act selfish and stupid. The most amazing part of it all is that these traits were always there. It's just so easy to forget when you have all the present-day Pearsons constantly talking about how great he was. I mean, in one of the first episodes, he got into a fistfight with a guy over nothing. He abandoned Nikki. He met Rebecca when he was in the middle of committing a robbery. All this serves as a foil for Kevin. For the last season or so, Kevin has been positioned as the heir to Jack's whole deal. He's supposed to be the next great husband and father. Which is weird because that kind of implies that it's because Kevin is Jack's biological son, which undermines Randall's whole arc a little, but let's not think about that too hard. Jack and Kevin are compared in the narrative constantly. Whenever Kevin's doing something in an episode, flashbacks to Jack show him doing the same thing or something thematically related. Kevin is constantly worried about living up to Jack's legacy, doing what he would do. But these flashbacks show that Jack screwed up just as much as Kevin did. The most overt example is the episode where both of them drive the newborns home from the hospital and act like neurotic, frazzled messes. The point being that Kevin shouldn't compete with this idealized version of Jack in his head, because that version isn't real and never was. We're all just flawed people doing our best. For most of his life, Kevin thought that he'd have what his parents had with Sophie. Flashbacks show more of how much they loved each other, but that Kevin took her for granted. We see the beginnings of some fights as Kevin keeps going to LA for acting while she stays in New York. We still haven't seen him cheat on her yet, though. We know that it happens around this point, so I assume/hope we'll see more of it next season. The point is, he blew it with her. Twice. So there's no way he'll have that storybook romance with her again. Nope. Nuh-uh. No chance. Definitely not happening. Wink. Still, though, this image of having a genuine love story with a woman and raising kids alongside her and having that perfect domestic life is something Kevin can't stop thinking about, which leads him to try and force it with Madison. I mentioned how the two of them don't have chemistry. At first, I worried that this was a flaw in the writing, but it soon became clear that this was intentional. Kevin and Madison aren't a good match. Kevin is just forcing himself to love her so that he can have the life where he's a present husband and father. This is something both of them slowly come to realize as their wedding approaches in the season finale. Before I get to the end of the season, here are some miscellaneous plotlines with other characters that I didn't get to touch on. Tess is dating a non-binary person, and Beth is having a little trouble with it. There's tension between the two of them all season, but they each come around to each other and strengthen their bond by the end. Malik starts working for Randall to boost his college application, which helps him get into Harvard, which is upsetting for Deja because that means he has to move away. We also see adult Deja and Annie show up at Kevin's house, and Deja is secretly pregnant. Nikki fell into a comic relief role this season, but there's a whole episode dedicated to showing his growth from someone afraid to make his love known to someone who would move heaven and earth to show love to Kevin and his kids. It's hinted that next season, he's going to try to reconnect with Sally. And in the second half of the season, Toby was not taking his job loss well. He's been acting frustrated and angry in a similar way to when he went off his antidepressants. Now, the season finale. Kevin and Madison's wedding. By this point, we've got multiple episodes worth of stories implying that Kevin doesn't really love Madison, so we kinda know where this is headed. Kevin obsesses over making sure every detail of the wedding is perfect to overcompensate for any doubts he's feeling. Meanwhile, Toby tells Kate about a job offer he got in San Francisco. Kate's not happy about it, but she's confident that they can make long-distance work. She even goes so far as to try to quit her music teacher job, but her boss Philip says she shouldn't. Randall awkwardly talks to Rebecca about Laurel, where she apologizes for not helping him navigate his desire for his birth parents. Beth helps Tess make her bridesmaid's dress into something she's more comfortable wearing. But of course, the wedding falls apart when Madison confronts Kevin about whether or not he loves her. He thinks that even though he doesn't, he can learn to love her and be a good husband. But Madison understandably doesn't think that's good enough, so the wedding's off.
I can't marry someone who's not in love with me.
There was a good chunk of the season where I really did think this couple was happening, and I wasn't a fan. But now that it isn't, I have to ask, does this mean that Sophie is still on the table? The show kept teasing us with all these little moments throughout the season. It seems like that's what they're building towards. I'm pretty sure Sophie was engaged last we checked in on her, but that can change. We'll see. The finale also shows us a few scenes of Kevin at a wedding, and it's presented in an intentionally confusing way to make us think this is his wedding in the present. But actually, he's giving a speech for some other wedding in the near future. In the last shot of the season, we see whose wedding it is, and...
Yes, this is the last time I'm doing this, so go crazy, brother.
You're okay if I do some British jokes at your expense, right? Hey, if you can't take the piss out of your future brother-in-law, who can you take the piss out of, right?
No. What? No. What? No! I'm not proud of it, but when I saw this, my first thought was, Toby better be dead. It remains to be seen what's actually happening here. The implication is that Kate and Toby get divorced at some point because of Toby's San Francisco job. That's what they want us to think anyway. Like I keep saying though, your first assumption with stuff like this is usually wrong. It could be something stupid, like Kate and Philip are in a play together where a wedding happens. But whatever the case is, I'm not a fan. If Kate and Toby really did get divorced, I have trouble buying that. The show has spent too much time convincing us how rock solid their relationship is, and it's survived way worse than this. And if it is some kind of fake out, that would make all this super lame empty shock value. So overall, I like season 5 less than the previous seasons. I don't know how much COVID derailed whatever their original plan was, so I'm not going to speculate. I'm just judging what we do have. The thing is, I couldn't pinpoint anything the show is specifically doing wrong. The show mostly feels like business as usual, the same kind of stuff happening. But maybe that's it. It is all the same. After all this time, the same kinds of storylines don't have the same punch because we've seen them before, in a classic case of diminishing returns. It was definitely not all bad though. My feelings on the show as a whole are still positive, and I'm still excited to see how the final season wraps up. There are still plot lines and mysteries I'm waiting to see resolved. Will Kevin end up with Sophie in the end? What's with this dumb cliffhanger? And what's this flash forward to Kevin's house building towards? It's season 6, the last season. Things are going to wrap up soon, although it doesn't feel like we're headed to a big explosive finale. There are a few loose threads I just mentioned, but overall, there's not a sense that the story is building to anything huge. Another thing that makes it feel different from Lost. This story is just about the lives of ordinary people, and people's lives don't really build to a climax. So let's recap the last season premiere. In the past, the kids watched the Challenger explosion on TV, which was something Kevin referenced in the pilot.
You know when I think it all went wrong for me was 1986, second grade. They were sending the Challenger up into space.
Kevin doesn't seem to care much, because he apparently didn't understand it was real. Rebecca and Jack are worried at first, but they decide he's probably fine. But that night, Kevin says to Kate that his parents will die one day. The episode intercuts between the Pearsons' 41st birthday now and their 36th from the pilot, to show you just how much they've grown, which could be tacky, except I never really registered how much they'd grown. Their character development has been so gradual that it kind of creeps up on you. Also, every character has always been so open and willing to talk about their feelings all the time, which gives the impression that they're healthy and self-aware, so you don't always notice how dysfunctional they are while you're in it. So yeah, the Pearsons have become wildly different, healthier people in 5 years. Kevin's getting used to co-parenting with Madison. Things are a little awkward, and he's a little uncomfortable seeing her with her new boyfriend Elijah, but he's working through it. He takes a role in a reboot of The Manny so he can live in LA and raise his kids. Randall finds out they caught the burglar who broke into his house. It turned out that the burglar was drugged out of his mind and didn't remember any of it. Even after everything, Randall ends up feeling bad for the guy and even bails him out of jail. And then he immediately skips town. This is his fatal flaw, his pathological need to help all people all the time. I complained that I didn't connect with this in season 1 because they didn't show it much, but now I get it. This is a smaller scale version of what could have happened with William.
His vice is his goodness. It's his compulsive drive to be perfect.
Kate and Toby are trying to make long distance work while Toby works in San Francisco. Toby arranges for Rebecca and Miguel to babysit so Kate can have a birthday to herself. Rebecca shows more signs of decline, and she spirals when she can't remember the word caboose. Kate's disappointed that Toby couldn't be here for her birthday, but her mood turns around when Philip calls her into work and has the students sing her a birthday song. I'm sure that even if I didn't say it, we're all thinking the same thing here. There's a shadow over this entire plotline the whole time, cast by what we've seen in the future, Kate marrying Philip. This episode ends with Toby giving her a surprise visit, diffusing the tension for now, but it doesn't change what we know is coming. So I described season 4 as the most Kevin-focused season. Season 5 was slightly weighted towards Randall. Season 6 is the Kate season, and I really mean that. In fact, I have very little to say about Kevin and Randall in the first half of the season. Kevin keeps being awkward around Madison and Eli, wishing he had somebody to love himself, and building the house for Rebecca. We also finally see Kevin and Sophie break up when he confesses to cheating on her. We don't even see the girl he cheated with, because really she doesn't matter. The point is that he ruined things with Sophie. His one true love. Forever. Except maybe not, considering how much of the narrative is spent on her. Randall has even less to do. He stresses about Rebecca's health, and he gets into a fight with Deja when she wants to move to Boston to be with Malik. He tells Malik to break up with Deja so that she can make her own path instead of following his, and Malik decides that he's right. They break up, for now, with the door open to get back together later. And those storylines are really about Rebecca and Malik, respectively. Randall's not the focal character in any of this stuff. He decides to run for senator, and it barely comes up. The focus of the season is pretty much all on Kate and her marriage to Toby. At this point in the show, the writers know what we're thinking. We got shown Kate's second wedding last season, but things were kept vague then. Anyone who's been watching the show for this long knows to be suspicious that we're being misled. So the writers go out of their way to nip that in the bud. Tell us that this time, it is what you think it is. Toby buys a barbecue smoker thing, which we see in the future that adult Jack still has. His wife, whose name is... Jeez, what was it? She's super underbaked. Right, Lucy. Lucy states explicitly that Jack's parents are divorced and that the smoker is related.
You know, you don't need to keep using that thing. It's like the literal symbol of the day your mom and dad's marriage blew up.
We're shown Jack's earliest memory of getting hurt at a backyard barbecue. The implication is clear. Toby grows more neglectful of Jack over time. He and Kate fight about it, and it comes to a head when Toby loses track of Jack during a barbecue, and Jack burns himself on the smoker, leading to their divorce. There's wiggle room on the details, but the important stuff is pretty clear-cut. During the first half of the season, this is pretty much how things play out. Toby spends a lot of time in San Francisco working, and on top of that, he sometimes has to work later than usual. This means he's not there to take care of the kids, so whenever he does take care of them, Kate micromanages him to make sure he's doing everything right, and they end up fighting more and more. They've had disagreements in the past, but this one really seems to be the one they can't figure out. They just keep fighting over the same stuff. This all comes to a head when Kate visits Toby in San Francisco for what was supposed to be a romantic getaway. Except Kate finds out that Toby had been organizing a move to San Francisco without telling her, and he got a job offer in LA and turned it down. Kate doesn't want to move because she likes her job, Rebecca's close by, and it's hard for a blind child to switch houses. The true root cause of the fight comes up, that Toby really likes his job, and might like it more than spending time with his wife and kids. Kate puts her foot down and says no, she's not moving, and she even calls Philip to ask for a promotion. Toby understands that he oversteps, but the core problem is still there. And soon, we come to the event we've been waiting for, the barbecue with the smoker. Things go pretty much exactly how we've been told it would. With one exception. There's a scene where Toby picks Jack up to show him the smoker. They're alone. Just the two of them. And when I say that my butthole was clenched so tight waiting for something bad to happen, whew. But then, Kate calls them in, and they go inside. Nothing happens. That's when it occurred to me that they never actually said it was the smoker that hurt him, just that it was the symbol of everything going wrong. And the episode's director knew exactly what they were doing here. Instead, Toby puts Jack in a room with a baby gate, but forgets to lock it. So Jack gets out, leaves the house, and walks down the street to get to the park, because that's the one place where his parents don't fight. The injury is from him tripping and falling because he was unsupervised and blind. That there is functionally the end of Kate and Toby's marriage. They have their biggest fight yet, when Toby actually tries to turn the blame around on her.
Maybe I would have heard the click if you weren't yelling at me all the time.
Oh, God, Toby, come on.
It's clear that Toby isn't as invested in being a dad as he should be. There's a moment where things seem like they're about to get better. Toby agrees to take the LA job, and they start going to marriage counseling. But in a long montage episode, we see that despite their best efforts, they can't stop fighting, and decide that it would be best if they got divorced. Now, I have thoughts on all this. I've already said that I wouldn't be a fan back when the show first raised the idea, and I'm still not on board. It all feels wrong. It feels like, outside of some light foreshadowing in the last couple of seasons, Toby made a complete 180 personality change. This is something the show does call attention to. Kate starts to imagine hanging out with old Toby, where the season 1 version of him pops in and makes fun of new Toby a little. In one of their fights, Kate admits to this, and Toby pretty much tells her that he's changed, and she needs to get over that.
Hey, you know what I'd love to say to old Toby, Kate? He was miserable and insecure and self-loathing. And all of that goofiness and the loud jokes, that was out of self-defense. Kate, you fell in love with a coping mechanism.
But everything about this is misidentifying what actually changed about Toby. Yes, old Toby was better and new Toby sucks. But it's not because old Toby was funny or kind of a slob, or that new Toby likes his job. Old Toby was a perfect guy because he would bend over backwards to do anything for Kate. Even when she treated him like crap, which was a lot. He would do everything in his power to push through it and help her through whatever emotional issue was at the root of the problem. Then all of a sudden, in season 6, Toby turns on a dime and doesn't care anymore. Kate's asking him to do the bare minimum as a husband and father, and he can't be bothered. And there's not even a clear reason why. He just flips with little to no warning. And yes, I know that they've had big fights before, which in theory makes this more believable, but I think that actually makes it worse, because you know they survived worse. Toby says he doesn't love their son? Okay, we can get through this. They want to live in different cities? Better get divorced. It's bad and dumb. I can already hear the comments coming in, like, oh, you're just a big Toby shipper, and you only think this is bad writing because you don't want to see them break up. If you think that, you don't know me very well. I've talked about this at length in the past. It's really hard to write a healthy couple for an extended period of time, because most story is built on conflict. I resent the direction the story is taking because it reeks of the writers running out of stuff to do. This is Jim and Pam going to marriage counseling in season 9 of The Office. This is the latest in a long line of fictional couples that broke up because it would make for a better story engine, even if it's wildly out of character for them. It pisses me off every time. But even though I don't like this premise on principle, I have to admit, the execution really was well done. If I didn't think too hard about how out of character Toby was and just looked at this season and a half in isolation, I found myself drawn in. This show is really good at creating realistic, nuanced arguments between couples. And the fact that the divorce was amicable and they stayed friends after did soften the blow. Also, I like Philip. We see the relationship develop mostly through montage, and it's so wholesome seeing his cold, hard exterior shatter as soon as he gets to know Kate. I can be grumpy about some of this, but it's not a death blow to my enjoyment of the season. Of the three siblings, Kate got the most attention, but at the real heart of the narrative is Rebecca. We've seen where she ends up, and this is where we get to see what leads up to it. Her Alzheimer's gets steadily worse as she tries to make the most of the time she has left. The flashbacks put a lot more emphasis on Rebecca. With Jack being presented as the perfect dad all the time, Rebecca got the short end of the stick a lot. Being next to Mr. Perfect all the time made her look really flawed by comparison. It was always her parenting mistakes getting highlighted. This season worked to rehabilitate her image and remind us that she actually was a great mom. Obviously, we're heading towards Rebecca's death in the series finale, surrounded by loved ones. So the thesis of this final season is essentially, when we look back over Rebecca's life, as a mom and the matriarch of the Pearson family, did she do a good job? Rebecca is the center of a lot of different plotlines and individual episodes that tie into this thematic question even if they seem unrelated. Nicky keeps talking about his old girlfriend Sally, so Rebecca pushes him to go visit her. It's all part of her carpe diem mentality from earlier in the show, but also, it's part of her way to work through her own stuff. She's weirdly invested in Nicky's love life because the idea of wasting limited time with your loved ones is upsetting to her. Sally is married, and they all end up having an awkward dinner with Sally and her husband. And Rebecca ends up talking to Sally about getting older and feeling like you lose parts of yourself to time. Her relationship with Kate gets explored in more detail. Kate has been so hostile to her for really no reason for most of her life, so the show highlights the ways that Rebecca was good to her as a kid, and how the relationship was repaired as an adult. She takes care of Kate's kids, who become a real emotional anchor to her. And Rebecca makes a big deal about naming Kate as the one responsible for her medical decisions when she can't do it herself, which Randall is a little pissed about, but he can get over it. Flashbacks really dig into the beginnings of her relationship with Miguel. This season is really the first time the two of them display actual chemistry. Miguel encourages her to start dating again, which she does, but it becomes clear that the two of them would make a better couple than the nothing guy she's with.
Okay, Susan Day from LA Law. You always say she's one beautiful...
Female!
Female, yes! I love
Hey,
you,
time's
Miguel,
up,
I
time's
love
up,
you.
time's up, time's up, guys.
Things are awkward, and Kevin gives a drunken speech to Miguel about how Jack is rolling in his grave. So Miguel moves to Houston for a fresh start. It's only years later that they reconnect and get married. This all goes a long way towards making Miguel feel like a real person instead of just a background prop. And it brings out Rebecca's inner emotional life that we didn't always get to see in flashbacks from Jack's or the kids' point of view. And further flashbacks develop the previous moms of the family. Rebecca has an episode dealing with her own mom always criticizing her. She refuses to share the secret ingredient to her sugar pie recipe, but after a heart-to-heart, they come to a relative understanding and she does share it. In the present, Rebecca shares the ingredient with Kate, keeping the tradition alive. Rebecca's mom has always been characterized as a one-dimensional shrew, but this fleshes her out in some small way. More importantly though, it contrasts her parenting skills with Rebecca's, showing how Rebecca pretty much entirely avoided all of her mom's mistakes. There's even an entire episode dedicated to Jack's mom. I don't think I mentioned her at all yet, because there hasn't been much to say about her. You'll recall that Jack's dad was an abusive alcoholic. His mom has always been shown to be the stereotypical abused housewife who's made of tissue paper. Years back, Jack helped her move out of his dad's house and set up a life away from him. Jack finds out that she died and goes to her funeral, and he's amazed to find that she built a really nice life for herself once she was out from under her husband's thumb. He thinks back on the years when he didn't do as much to stay in touch as he should have, and realizes just how much she cared for him at a distance. It all ties back to that theme that mothers have much richer internal lives than their kids ever know. About halfway through the season, things take a turn. The present timeline of the first half all takes place within a year, just like every other season. But as the show wraps up, time passes faster and faster, with a lot of episodes leaning on montages to fast forward through the later stages of the Pearsons' lives to show how things change. Kate and Toby's entire breakup, their divorce, and Kate's relationship with Philip all the way up to their wedding happens within one episode, through a series of individual scenes cut together across the years. Although it's followed by the wedding, which actually takes up 2 episodes. The main focus of the first one is on Rebecca, whose Alzheimer's has progressed so she doesn't always know what's going on. She keeps confusing Kevin for Jack. During the reception, the plan is for Rebecca to play a song on the piano, the theme song to the show, and everyone's worried that she won't be able to do it. But once she sits down and gets going, she plays perfectly. That's all nice and wholesome, but we also get teases that something's going on in Kevin's love life. Madison and Beth decide to do some detective work to figure out if he slept with anyone the night before. Was it Cass? Was it Sophie? Was it someone new? Now, me looking at this narratively, I've seen this trope before. Whenever a mystery introduces multiple suspects at the same time and gives them all equal weight, the right answer is none of them. Or all of them. That's a common enough trope that I'm sure a lot of people would have seen it coming. Usually it shows up in kids' stories because kids won't. So I was surprised to see it here. But the writers, again, found a way to squeeze more uncertainty out of it and gave an answer that was at the same time what I expected and not what I expected. The next episode happens parallel to the previous one. Kevin's feeling bummed out that he still hasn't found a true love watching this wedding happen. He has brief flirtations with all three women, but he spends the most time with Sophie. Sophie tells him she got divorced off screen, which, called it. They get to talking, and we already know Kevin still loves her, but the conversation shows us that Sophie totally still loves him. Things escalate, and they end up in his room making out. But Sophie stops and leaves because she's still afraid they'll just keep repeating what happened in the past. So the answer to the question, who did Kevin sleep with, is technically nobody, in accordance with this trope. But in every way that matters, it's Sophie. We know where this is headed. Finally, after all these years, they're finally going to get together for good. Sophie ends up talking to Rebecca, who gets confused and thinks Kevin and Sophie are still teenagers. And she says that Kevin's an idiot now, but he's going to grow up and be great, helping Sophie realize what we already know, that present-day Kevin is great. He's a way better person than he was at the start of the show, and he's mature enough to handle this relationship, finally. They find each other and kiss, and the whole room cheers, which made me roll my eyes a little, but in a good way, like, finally. After all that, it's the beginning of the end. The next episode is a Miguel episode, actually. It cuts between Miguel's early life as an immigrant and the present where he takes care of Rebecca as they both get older. The theme behind it is that Miguel doesn't always know where he belongs. As a Puerto Rican, or assimilated American, with his kids, or the Pearsons. Which is a bit of meta-commentary because nobody's sure if he belongs in this show at all. This last season does its best to make Miguel matter, but there's only so much they can do after 5 seasons of him being an afterthought. The years pass as Miguel devotes his entire being to taking care of Rebecca, which gets harder and harder for him. The Pearsons make him hire a healthcare aide, which he doesn't want to do because Rebecca's care is the only thing that gives his life meaning these days. But he agrees. The years keep passing. Kevin helps him reconnect with his son before he dies, and they scatter his ashes at the house and in Puerto Rico. This is a nice story in isolation, but it's a little undercut by the stuff I mentioned before, and by the realization that, the reason they wrote it this way was to give Miguel closure and get him out of the way so he doesn't take away from Rebecca at the end. It's a little awkward. The third to last episode. Miguel is dead, and the family has to decide how to handle Rebecca without him. Kevin wants to continue keeping her at the house he built where family can visit, and Randall thinks she should move in with him so he can take care of her. Randall always thinks he's the only one who can do it right. But it's Kate's decision. She's quiet for most of the episode, trying to decide and afraid of fighting with her brothers. Parallel to all this are a grab bag of flashbacks of Rebecca taking care of the kids over the years, being a great mom and doing everything they need. Kate finally points out that Kevin and Randall are thinking of their mom in the abstract because of her Alzheimer's. And to remind him that she's still their mom, she has them take care of her, just like she once took care of them. They then arrange for Kevin and Sophie to move into the house with her. The last 2 episodes finally skip forward to the scene we've been seeing, with the family gathering around Rebecca's bedside. As Rebecca is dying, she imagines that she's on a train taking her to the afterlife, when she meets with other characters who have died. And as characters pay their respects, she sees them on the train with her. And we get one more classic fake-out twist. You might remember that at this point in time, Deja is pregnant. You think, she and Malik must have gotten back together, and Malik is the dad. Who else would it be? But the episode keeps cutting to this guy, Marcus. As a kid, he and his family got into a car accident that left him with a limp, and he grew up to be a medical researcher trying to cure cancer. He's characterized as a workaholic, and Deja mentions that her boyfriend works a lot. So you go, maybe. But no, Malik was the father. The real reason why Marcus is in the story is that his car accident happened on the same day Jack died, and they were in the hospital at the same time. Jack runs into Marcus's dad in the lobby, covered in burns, and they comfort each other. Jack passes on Dr. Katowski's line from the pilot, that no lemon is so sour that you can't make lemonade out of it. That line got passed down and sort of became the family motto, that you can always turn bad times into good ones. That later gave Marcus the confidence to keep working after his funding got shut down, and he eventually invents a cure for Alzheimer's. One last twist of fate, that Jack indirectly helped cure his wife's disease. The end of the episode has Rebecca get to the end of the train. She won't pass on, though, until Kate gets there. Kate was in England at the time, and she spends the episode rushing to get there. She finally does, and Rebecca lets herself pass, entering the caboose of the train and getting into bed with Jack after all these years apart. You'd think this would be the finale, But there's one more episode that serves as an epilogue of sorts. In the present, Rebecca's funeral happens and the family grieves. Deja tells Randall she's pregnant, and Randall implies he might run for president. But the bulk of the episode is a flashback. So, there were 3 actors playing each of the Pearson siblings, as adults, as teens, and as kids. But for the last season and a half, the show mostly phased out the kid actors for younger kids because they were getting too old. But for this one episode, they're back with a scene that was filmed years earlier. This scene is mostly a normal, boring Saturday where nothing much happens, which Rebecca described as her favorite kind of memory. The point of all this is to show that there's still so much of the Pearsons' lives that we never saw. That there are all these ordinary moments in between all the drama. The show ends with the big 3 promising they'll never drift apart. And the final scene is Rebecca and Jack in that bed on the train, where Jack tells Rebecca she did a good job as a parent, and that now she can watch her kids' lives from above, just like he's been doing all these years. And that's This Is Us. After over 100 episodes, 3 hours of video essay, and enough written words to fill a book, we've reached the end. But what was the point? Why bother talking about the show at all? What have we learned? I started all this because I wanted to focus on the mystery, but it turned out that This Is Us didn't really have that much mystery. For longtime viewers of mine, it only hits a 1 out of 10 on the mystery box scale, because it technically has multiple mysteries in it. In this case though, that's a good thing. Other stories I've covered in the past sometimes use mystery to cover up for a lack of direction or depth. They'll go, oh, nothing interesting is happening right now, but check out these dangling plot threads. Don't you just want to keep watching to see how they get resolved? This Is Us stands apart from stories like that, by building the foundation of its story on good character drama. This show isn't super plot heavy. All the stuff that matters comes from the inner lives of the characters and the way they talk about their feelings. I have to say, writing episode summaries, because again, I wrote a full summary of every episode of the show, was surprisingly hard because there weren't always a lot of things that happened. Sometimes the big resolution to a conflict is just 2 people sitting and talking. How do you capture all the nuances of everything they say? Most of the time, I just ended up writing, they talked about X. This show was already a good story. It just uses mystery as a supplement to add some extra intrigue. The one big mystery is how Jack died, which they thankfully resolved within 2 seasons. A lesser show would have forced a way to stretch it out for the entire run. It was a good plot hook, getting the audience to wonder what happened to him, but the mystery isn't the point. The real purpose of keeping it a secret is to create character tension in the present day. The Pearsons are dysfunctional in the first few seasons because they never really got over their dad's death. Keeping the details of his death a secret forces the audience to pay attention to the way the kids act, think, and feel, and try to sort out why they feel the way they do. It's not unlike getting to know a person in real life with past trauma as they slowly open up to you. It's only after Jack's death is shown that the festering wound is ripped open, and the healing can finally begin, leading to an ending where everyone is way happier and healthier. On a smaller scale, the show uses mystery to tie together things that would otherwise not mesh super well. Almost every season ends with a flash forward of some kind that hints at big changes to the characters' lives. How are they going to get there is a constant question hanging over the first half of most seasons. This is a classic writing trick that primes the audience to accept these big changes. Hinting at them ahead of time makes them feel less random. And there were dozens of times where random new characters were introduced, with the implied question of how they fit into the overall story, and they always did in a way you weren't expecting. This show is a masterclass in setting up mysteries in small-scale ways that encourage speculation and guessing, and then still give you an answer that never occurred to you. It's incredible. Every time I thought I had the writers pegged, they zig when I'm expecting a zag and surprise me. To remind people who are new to my channel, this is not the kind of show I usually cover. My specialty is in long, twisty, plot-heavy genre shows with a strong mystery element.
So just your siblings and your mom and not the others?
The others. What are we on, Lost?
But with those kinds of shows, the mystery element can be really hit or miss. There are just so many pitfalls. They might put all the emphasis on the ending and resolution to the mysteries, building them up so much that no answer would be satisfying. They might run out of story and start introducing random nonsense to keep the plot going, ruining whatever carefully crafted plot came before. Their lore could get so dense and convoluted that the audience gives up trying to follow it. They could add mystery and intrigue entirely as an afterthought, and get caught off guard when fans actually expect answers and resolution. This Is Us might be a completely different genre, but it has lessons that shows like this can take to heart. I don't think it was planned out from the beginning. It was making things up as it went along each season, but that didn't matter. It kept its plot compelling through attention to detail, only introducing mysteries when it served a clear purpose in the narrative, and focusing on the characters first and foremost. That initial comparison, the dramedy version of Lost, ended up being more accurate than I thought at first. If I want a good example of how to write 6 seasons of TV, built around complex characters in a high-emotion story that uses flashbacks to reveal selective information about characters' pasts in order to tell one overarching story about them overcoming their flaws, I know which one I feel safer recommending.
But how are all these characters related? When does the show take place? How does Birthday Dad die? Those are mysteries we'll tease all season.
Birthday Dad. You'll laugh, you'll cry, you'll birthday dad.